The moment Isabella Valenti looked into the eyes of Milan's most dangerous man, she should have run. Instead, on a moonlit balcony overlooking the city that whispered his name in fear, the brilliant young doctor found herself drawn to the one person her mother trusted above all others, and the one man she should never desire. What happens when forbidden attraction collides with deadly loyalty? When a 27-year age gap becomes the least dangerous thing about falling in love? Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. This is a tale of power, passion, and the price of choosing your own destiny. The Murano chandeliers cast fractured rainbows across the marble floors of the Palazzo Reale, each crystal prism scattering light like shattered diamonds. Isabella Valenti stood beneath one such chandelier, a flute of untouched champagne warming in her hand, and wondered how something so beautiful could feel so suffocating. Around her, Milan's elite circulated through the memorial gala like well-dressed sharks, predatory, purposeful, never still. The women wore gowns that cost more than most people earned in a year. The men wore power like cologne, heavy and unmistakable. And every single one of them had come to pay their respects to Vittorio Conti, a businessman whose legitimate enterprises were as legendary as his illegitimate ones. Isabella had returned from Boston only 3 days ago. 3 days, and already the walls were closing in. "Isabella, darling," her mother's voice cut through the ambient music and muted conversations. Lucia Valenti materialized at her elbow, elegant in midnight blue, diamonds at her throat catching the light. "You're hiding." "I'm observing," Isabella corrected, but her mother's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled. "Observe from the center of the room, then. The Marchese di Santoro has asked about you twice. He's recently widowed, you know, very respectable, very wealthy." Isabella's fingers tightened on the champagne flute. "Mama, I've been home for 72 hours. I'm not interested in being matched with recently widowed Marchese or anyone else." Lucia's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her dark eyes, something that looked almost like sympathy before it hardened into determination. "You're 23 years old, Isabella. With your medical degree and our family connections, you could have anyone. You should be thinking about your future." "I am thinking about my future. It involves medicine, not marriage." "Why not both?" Lucia touched her daughter's cheek, a gesture that would have seemed affectionate to any observer. Isabella knew better. It was assessment, calculation. "You think I don't understand wanting more than what's expected of you? I was young once too. And yet here you are, expecting the same from me." For a moment, Isabella thought her mother might actually argue, might actually engage with the truth neither of them wanted to speak aloud. But Lucia Valenti hadn't built an empire by being sentimental. "The Rossi twins are here," Lucia said instead, smoothly changing the subject. "You remember them from school? Go say hello. Remind people that the Valenti family hasn't forgotten where we came from." It was a dismissal dressed as a suggestion. Isabella recognized it for what it was, an order wrapped in velvet. She drained the champagne in 3 long swallows, the bubbles burning her throat, and set the empty flute on a passing waiter's tray with enough force to make the crystal ring. The crowd seemed to part for her as she moved through it, though whether out of respect for her family name or simple self-preservation, she couldn't say. The Valenti name carried weight in Milan. Her mother had made certain of that. Isabella made it as far as the Eastern Gallery before the press of bodies and false smiles became unbearable. She slipped through a set of French doors onto a marble balcony, trading recycled air and perfume for the cool autumn night. The balcony overlooked Milan's historic center. Below, the Piazza del Duomo sprawled in all its illuminated glory, the cathedral's Gothic spires reaching toward stars that city lights had long since drowned out. Traffic moved in distant rivers of light. Somewhere, a church bell tolled the hour. Isabella braced her hands on the stone balustrade and closed her eyes, breathing deeply. Boston seemed very far away. The hospital where she'd completed her residency, the small apartment she'd shared with 2 other doctors, the coffee shop on the corner that knew her order by heart, all of it felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Maybe it did. Maybe that Isabella, the one who'd chosen medicine over family obligation, who'd spent 4 years building something that belonged only to her, had been left behind the moment her plane touched down at Malpensa. "Running away from your own party?" The voice came from the shadows to her left, deep and textured like aged whiskey. Isabella's eyes snapped open, her head turning sharply. He stood in the darkest corner of the balcony, so still she might have missed him entirely if he hadn't spoken. The dim light from the ballroom carved his features in sharp relief. A strong jaw, prominent cheekbones, eyes that gleamed dark as obsidian. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal suit that had been tailored with the kind of precision that spoke of serious money. Silver threaded through his black hair at the temples, and Isabella knew exactly who he was. "Mr. Moretti," she said, surprise making her voice sharper than intended. "I didn't realize anyone else was out here." Adrian Moretti stepped forward into a pool of light that spilled through the French doors. He was older than her mother by several years, 50, if the rumors were accurate. But age had refined rather than diminished him, turning what must have once been raw intensity into something controlled and infinitely more dangerous. Everyone in Milan knew Adrian Moretti. More accurately, everyone knew to fear him. "I'm not here for the party," he said. His voice carried the particular accent of someone who'd been born in the streets and learned to speak like the elite without ever quite shedding their origins. "I'm here because when Vittorio Conti dies, people notice. And when people notice, they sometimes get ideas." "Ideas?" Isabella echoed. "About opportunities, about power vacuums, about what might be taken when everyone's attention is elsewhere." His dark eyes settled on her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Your mother asked me to keep an eye on things tonight." Of course she did. Isabella felt a familiar frustration kindle in her chest. "My mother thinks the entire world is a threat." "Sometimes she's right." Adrian moved to the opposite end of the balustrade, maintaining careful distance between them. "You're the daughter who went to America." It wasn't a question, but Isabella answered anyway. "I went to medical school." "Because you wanted to save lives, or because you wanted to escape?" The question landed like a blade between her ribs, precise and unexpected. Isabella turned to face him fully, reassessing. This was not the conversation she'd expected to have with one of her mother's associates, certainly not with a man whose reputation involved significantly more violence than philosophical inquiry. "Is there a difference?" she asked. "Usually." Adrian's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, became marginally less guarded. "Though I found that the best doctors are often running from something. Pain recognizes pain." "You sound like you know a lot of doctors." "I've needed a lot of doctors." He said it flatly, without self-pity or pride, just fact. "Occupational hazard." Isabella should have been disturbed. Should have made her excuses and returned to the ballroom, to safety, to the world she understood. Instead, she found herself leaning against the balustrade, curiosity overriding caution. "What are you running from, Mr. Moretti?" His laugh was low and humorless. "The question you should be asking, Dr. Valenti, is what I'm running toward. The answer to that changes depending on the day." "And today?" "Today, I'm trying to prevent a war." He pulled a cigarette case from his jacket pocket, paused with it halfway open. "Do you mind?" She shook her head. He lit the cigarette with practiced efficiency, and smoke curled between them like a visible manifestation of all the things neither of them was saying. "A war," Isabella repeated. "Over Vittorio Conti's death? Over what he left behind, territory, businesses, connections. When a man like Vittorio dies, 20 men think they should inherit his throne." Adrian took a long drag from the cigarette. "Most of them are wrong. Some of them are stupid enough to try anyway. And you?" "I don't want his throne. I have my own." The smoke he exhaled was a gray ghost in the night air. "But I made promises to your mother a long time ago. I keep my promises." There was a story there, layers of history between Adrian Moretti and Lucia Valenti that Isabella had never been privy to. Growing up, she'd known her mother had powerful friends. She'd understood, in the way children understand things without having them explained, that the Valenti family's wealth and influence came from sources that weren't discussed at dinner parties. But she'd never known the details, had never wanted to know. "Why are you really out here?" Isabella asked. "If you're supposed to be watching for threats, shouldn't you be inside?" "I have people inside, and I find that threats are easier to spot from a distance." His gaze moved past her to the ballroom beyond the French doors. "Out here, I can see the patterns. Who's talking to whom? Who's avoiding whom? Who's drinking too much, and who's staying sober?" "And what pattern brought you to this particular balcony?" Adrian's eyes returned to her, and for the first time, something like amusement flickered in their depths. The pattern where Lucia Valenti's daughter escaped the ballroom the moment her mother's back was turned. That felt like something worth investigating. I'm not a threat. No, he agreed. But you're vulnerable, and vulnerability attracts predators. The words should have felt patronizing. Instead, they felt honest, an assessment delivered without judgment or condescension. Adrian Moretti spoke to her like an equal, which was more than most people in that ballroom had managed. I can take care of myself, Isabella said. I'm sure you can. That doesn't mean you should have to. He stubbed out the cigarette on the stone balustrade, then field stripped it with the kind of unconscious precision that spoke of military training. The remnants disappeared into his pocket. Your mother worries about you. My mother wants to control me. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Isabella laughed despite herself, a short, sharp sound that seemed to surprise both of them. You defend her. I understand her. Adrian's expression sobered. Lucia Valenti built something from nothing, created safety where there was none. She did things that would horrify you to protect what mattered to her. And now the thing that matters most is trying to run away. The observation struck too close to home. Isabella felt her defenses rising, walls slamming into place with the speed of long practice. I'm not running away, I'm living my own life. By coming back to Milan? I came back because my grandmother is dying. The words came out harsher than intended. Because family matters, even when they're suffocating. Adrian was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. Your grandmother raised you, didn't she, after your father died? Isabella's throat tightened. You knew my father? I knew of him. By the time I came into your mother's orbit, Paolo Valenti had already been gone for several years. Adrian paused. I'm sorry for your loss. Even old grief is still grief. The unexpected sympathy nearly undid her. Isabella had spent the last 3 days navigating condolences about her grandmother's declining health, fielding questions about her return to Milan, deflecting her mother's increasingly pointed suggestions about her future. No one had acknowledged the older, deeper loss that still ached like a phantom limb. Her father had died when she was 8. A car accident, they'd said. Quick, painless, nothing to be done. She'd learned later, much later, that very few deaths in her family's world were truly accidental. He would have wanted you to do what made you happy, Adrian said quietly. I may not have known him, but I know that about fathers and daughters. Do you have children? No. Something crossed his face, regret perhaps, or relief. It was gone before she could identify it. That particular blessing was never in the cards for me. Blessing, Isabella repeated. You say that like you mean it. I do. Children are... He hesitated, seeming to search for words. They're proof that the world can be better than what we've made it. They're hope in its purest form. That's almost poetic, Mr. Moretti. Even killers can appreciate poetry, Dr. Valenti. The admission hung between them, bald, unflinching. Adrian Moretti had just named himself a killer with the same casual certainty most people used to discuss the weather. Isabella knew she should be afraid, should make her excuses, return to the ballroom, find her mother. Instead, she found herself asking, Do you regret it? The killing? He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Some of it, not all of it. The world I operate in doesn't leave much room for half measures. You protect what's yours, or you lose it. That sounds lonely. It is. The acknowledgement was simple, unadorned. But loneliness is a small price for keeping the people I care about safe. And do you care about people? Adrian's smile was slight but genuine. More than is probably wise. Your mother, for instance. I've known Lucia for 20 years, watched her build an empire, raise a daughter, bury her grief in work and strategy. She's the closest thing I have to family. The revelation shifted something in Isabella's understanding. This wasn't just her mother's associate, some business connection maintained through mutual benefit. This was someone who knew Lucia Valenti as a person rather than a force of nature. She never mentioned you, Isabella said. In all the years I was growing up, I never heard your name. That's because she's smarter than I am. She kept her world separate, kept you separate from the things she did to maintain them. Adrian's expression grew distant. She wanted you to have choices she never had, to be free in ways she couldn't afford to be. And yet here I am, back in Milan, being paraded in front of eligible bachelors like some kind of prize, because she's terrified. The words were blunt, but not unkind. You're all she has, Isabella. The only thing she's built that isn't stained with compromise and consequence. She's trying to secure your future the only way she knows how. By controlling it. By protecting it. Adrian turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his dark eyes pinned her in place. You think she doesn't see what you want? Doesn't understand your need for freedom? She sees it. She understands it better than you know. But she also knows what this world does to young women who don't have protection. She's trying to give you safety. I don't want safety. I want choice. Sometimes you can't have both. The truth of it settled over Isabella like heavy fabric, suffocating in its weight, impossible to shrug off. She thought of her apartment in Boston, of hospital shifts that stretched into exhaustion, of the simple, uncomplicated satisfaction of making a diagnosis, starting treatment, saving a life. She thought of coffee with colleagues who knew nothing about her family, of walking streets where no one recognized her name, of building an identity that belonged only to her. And she thought of her grandmother, dying slowly in the villa where Isabella had spent her childhood, of her mother who'd held an empire together through force of will and strategic ruthlessness, of a father she barely remembered, but whose absence had shaped every choice she'd ever made. I don't know how to be both, she admitted quietly. The person who saves lives and the person my mother needs me to be. Maybe you don't have to choose. Adrian's voice was gentle in a way that seemed incongruous with everything she knew about him. Maybe there's a middle path. I'm not very good at middle paths. I tend to pick a direction and commit. I've noticed. His mouth quirked. Medical school in America, 4 years without coming home. That's not half measures. My grandmother was healthy then. Things were different. And now? Now, Isabella thought, everything was falling apart. Her grandmother was dying. Her mother was tightening control. Milan felt both foreign and too familiar, like trying on childhood clothes that no longer fit. And she was standing on a balcony with one of the most dangerous men in Italy, having the first honest conversation she'd had since stepping off the plane. Now I'm trying to figure out if I belong here, Isabella said. Do you want to? It was the question she'd been avoiding since the moment she'd booked her flight home. The question that sat heavy in her chest at night, that woke her at 3 a.m, that made her medical degree feel both essential and impossibly distant. I don't know, she admitted. I want to be with my grandmother before she's gone. I want to understand what my mother built and why. But I also want... She trailed off, unsure how to articulate the restless hunger that had driven her away in the first place. Freedom, Adrian supplied. You want to belong to yourself before you belong to anyone else. Yes. The word came out on a breath. Exactly that. That's not weakness, Isabella. That's survival instinct. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. Your mother survived by building walls. You're trying to survive by breaking them down. Both strategies have merit. But only one of them works in this world. This world, Adrian said carefully, isn't the only world available. You could build something different. How? My family. Your family is your history, not your destiny. You're a doctor. You've already built something separate from the Valenti Empire. That took courage most people don't have. Isabella looked at him, really looked. At the silver in his hair, the lines around his eyes that spoke of decades spent navigating dangerous waters. At the controlled power in his stance. The careful distance he maintained. The way he spoke to her like she was a person rather than a puzzle to be solved or a prize to be won. Why are you telling me this? She asked. You work for my mother. You should be trying to convince me to stay, to fall in line, to do what she wants. I work with your mother. There's a difference. Adrian's expression was unreadable. And I'm telling you this because I've spent my entire life being what other people needed me to be. Soldier, enforcer, protector. I'm good at it. But I'm 50 years old, Isabella, and I can count on one hand the number of choices I've made purely for myself. That's sad. That's honest. He pulled out another cigarette, then seemed to think better of it and returned it to the case. You have something I never did. Options. Use them. Don't let fear or obligation or family legacy trap you into a life you'll resent. Even if it disappoints my mother? Especially then. Lucia is strong enough to handle disappointment. What she can't handle is losing you entirely, and that's what will happen if you let her build your life for you. The French doors behind them opened, spilling light and music and the ambient noise of 200 wealthy people pretending to mourn. A woman Isabella vaguely recognized from her childhood, someone's wife, someone's daughter, stepped onto the balcony and immediately froze. "Oh," she said, her eyes widening as they moved from Isabella to Adrian and back again. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not interrupting," Isabella assured her, even though they absolutely were. "I was just getting some air." The woman's gaze lingered on Adrian for a beat too long, recognition and fear flickering across her features in rapid succession. Then she was gone, retreating into the ballroom with the kind of speed that suggested she'd accidentally walked in on something dangerous. "That will be all over the party in 10 minutes, Adrian observed mildly. Lucia Valenti's daughter alone on a balcony with Adrian Moretti. "Let them talk." "They will, and they'll make assumptions." "Good." Isabella felt a reckless edge sharp in her voice. "Maybe if everyone thinks I'm making scandalous choices, my mother will stop trying to make respectable ones for me." Adrian laughed, a real laugh this time, rich and surprised. "That's a dangerous game, Dr. Valenti." "I'm tired of being safe." "Safety," he said, his expression sobering, "is underrated when you've lived without it." Before Isabella could respond, the French doors opened again. This time it was her mother, elegant and composed, her eyes taking in the scene with a single sweeping glance. "Isabella," Lucia said, her voice carrying just enough edge to suggest this was not a request, "the Marchese di Santoro is asking for you." "I'm having a conversation." "You can have conversations inside." Lucia's gaze flicked to Adrian. "I need to speak with Mr. Moretti, privately." Isabella felt the dismissal, like a physical push. Every instinct screamed at her to resist, to stand her ground, to choose this moment as the hill she'd die on. But Adrian caught her eye and gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Pick your battles," the gesture said. "This isn't the one." "Of course," Isabella said, the words tasting like surrender. She moved toward the French doors, then paused. "Thank you for the conversation, Mr. Moretti. It was illuminating." "The pleasure was mine, Dr. Valenti." Isabella stepped back into the ballroom, but not before she caught the look that passed between her mother and Adrian Moretti, a look that spoke of shared history, mutual understanding, and secrets Isabella was only beginning to grasp. The crowd swallowed her immediately. Isabella let it carry her toward the bar, toward another glass of champagne she wouldn't drink, toward a future that felt simultaneously inevitable and impossible to bear. But something had shifted on that balcony. Some wall had been breached, some truth acknowledged. Adrian Moretti had looked at her and seen not a prize or a problem, but a person trapped between worlds. And in seeing it, he'd given her something she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Permission. Permission to want more. Permission to choose differently. Permission to be angry about the cage her mother had built, even if it was gilded and meant with love. Isabella made it through the next 2 hours on autopilot. She smiled at the Marchese di Santoro and deflected his interest with practiced ease. She made conversation with her mother's associates and family friends. She presented the perfect image of Lucia Valenti's accomplished daughter, poised, educated, appropriate. And the entire time, her mind was on a balcony, in a conversation that had lasted less than 30 minutes, but had somehow shifted the entire foundation of her understanding. When the gala finally ended and the guests began to depart, Isabella found her mother in the Palazzo's private study, reviewing papers that probably related to businesses Isabella didn't want to know about. "You were rude tonight," Lucia said, without looking up. "I was honest." "In our world, there's no difference." Lucia set down her pen and finally met Isabella's eyes. "What did Adrian say to you?" "Why? Are you worried?" "I'm always worried." "You're my daughter." Lucia's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Adrian Moretti is a good man, but he's not a safe man. I need you to understand that distinction." "He told me to make my own choices." Lucia was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "And what choices are you planning to make?" "I don't know yet." Isabella straightened her shoulders. "But they'll be mine. Not yours. Not anyone else's. Mine." Her mother's smile was sad and knowing. You're more like me than you want to admit, Isabella. Stubborn, proud, willing to burn the world down for what you believe in. Is that a warning? It's an observation. Lucia stood, moving around the desk to stand before her daughter. I've made choices I'm not proud of to keep you safe, to give you options I never had. But I can't live your life for you. Then stop trying. I can't. Lucia's voice cracked just slightly, revealing the fear beneath the iron control. You're all I have. If something happened to you, nothing's going to happen to me. You don't know that. This world is your world, not mine. Isabella softened her tone. Mama, I love you. I appreciate everything you've done for me. But I need to figure out who I am separate from the Valenti name. Lucia's hand came up to cup Isabella's cheek, the same gesture from earlier, but warmer now, more honest. You are my greatest accomplishment, Tesoro. My greatest fear. My greatest hope. Then let me be my own person too. Her mother's eyes glistened. I'm trying, but you have to understand, letting go means risking everything. I know. Isabella covered her mother's hand with her own. But holding on too tight means losing me anyway. The truth settled between them, heavy and undeniable. Lucia nodded slowly, accepting what she couldn't change. Adrian's right, she said finally. You should make your own choices. You spoke with him? Briefly. He told me I was suffocating you, that if I didn't give you room to breathe, you'd run so far I'd never find you. Lucia's smile was wry. He knows something about being caged. Isabella thought of Adrian on the balcony, speaking about choices made for others rather than himself, about loneliness and protection and the narrow path between survival and surrender. What happened to him? She asked, to make him like this. That, Lucia said quietly, is his story to tell. Not mine. It was a boundary. One of the few her mother had ever drawn between them. Isabella recognized it for what it was, respect. Lucia Valenti might control empires and bend powerful men to her will, but she wouldn't violate Adrian Moretti's privacy, even for her daughter. That said something important about the man on the balcony, something Isabella found herself wanting to understand. I'm going to check on Nonna, Isabella said. She'll be asleep. I know, but I want to sit with her anyway. Lucia nodded, understanding. I'll see you in the morning. We'll talk more then. About what? About how we move forward without destroying each other in the process. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. Isabella kissed her mother's cheek and left the study, exhaustion finally catching up with her. But as she climbed into the car that would take her to her grandmother's villa, she found herself thinking not of the battles ahead with her mother or the dying woman she was racing back to Milan to see. She thought of dark eyes and quiet honesty, of a man who'd killed but still believed in poetry, of a conversation on a balcony that had felt more real than anything she'd experienced in months. And she wondered what it meant that the first person to truly see her since returning home was someone the entire city feared. The villa sat in the hills outside Milan, surrounded by gardens that Isabella's grandmother had tended for 40 years. Even in autumn, with most of the flowers gone dormant and leaves carpeting the ground in shades of amber and rust, the place held a kind of wild beauty that no amount of careful landscaping could replicate. Isabella found her grandmother exactly where she'd expected, not in bed as her mother had predicted, but in the greenhouse wrapped in blankets despite the humid warmth, her thin hands working soil around a cutting that probably wouldn't survive the winter. Nonna, Isabella said softly, not wanting to startle her. Giulia Conti looked up, and despite the illness that had carved her body down to its essential framework, her eyes were sharp and knowing. Bella, you're home early. I thought that dreadful gala would go until dawn. It felt like it did. Isabella pulled a stool close to her grandmother's wheelchair and sat, inhaling the rich scent of earth and growing things. What are you planting? Hope, Giulia said with a small smile. Though the gardener calls it rosemary, I'm trying to get one more cutting to take root before I go. Don't talk like that. Why not? We both know what's coming. Giulia's hands continued their work, steady despite the tremor that had become more pronounced in recent weeks. Death isn't something to fear, Tesoro. It's just the next garden we tend. Isabella's throat tightened. She'd spent 4 years learning to save lives, to fight death with science and skill and sheer stubborn determination. The idea of accepting it, of letting it come without resistance, felt like betrayal of everything she'd built herself into. "I'm not ready," she whispered. "We never are. That's the point." Julia set down her trowel and reached for Isabella's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "But I didn't ask you to come home so you could watch me die, Bella. I asked you to come home so you could learn to live." "I know how to live." "Do you? Because from what your mother tells me, you've spent 4 years running away from everything that scared you." Julia's expression was gentle but unflinching. "That's survival, my darling. Not the same thing as living." Isabella wanted to argue, to defend the choices she'd made, the life she'd built in Boston. But sitting in this greenhouse with her dying grandmother, surrounded by the evidence of a woman who'd spent 8 decades cultivating beauty from nothing, the words felt hollow. "I met someone tonight," she said instead. Julia's eyebrows rose. "The Marchese? Your mother mentioned him. Quite the catch, apparently." "No, not him." Isabella hesitated, uncertain why she was sharing this. "Adrian Moretti." Her grandmother went very still. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. "Did you now?" "You know him. Everyone knows Adrian Moretti. The question is whether they're smart enough to fear him or foolish enough to trust him." Julia studied Isabella's face with the intensity of a woman who'd spent her life reading subtext and hidden agendas. "Which are you?" "I don't know yet. Maybe neither. Or maybe both." Julia released Isabella's hand and returned to her rosemary cutting, but her attention remained focused on her granddaughter. "What did you talk about?" "Freedom. Choices. The difference between safety and control." Isabella traced patterns in the condensation on the greenhouse glass. "He told me I should live my own life, even if it disappoints Mama." "Of course he did. Adrian understands cages better than most." Julia pressed soil around the cutting with careful precision. "He and your mother have that in common. They both built prisons to keep themselves safe and called it protection." "What do you mean?" "I mean that Lucia became what she needed to become to survive. And Adrian—" Julia paused, choosing her words. "Adrian became what he needed to become to protect the people he loves. Neither of them had the luxury of choosing freely. They did what the world demanded. And me? You, Tesoro, have choices they never did. Your mother made sure of that, even if she can't quite let you use them." Julia's smile was sad. "It's the curse of strong women. We fight so hard to give our daughters freedom that we can't bear to watch them exercise it." Isabella thought of her mother's face in the study, the fear beneath the control, the love wrapped in suffocation. "She asked Adrian to watch over me tonight." "I know. She asked me first if I thought it was appropriate." Julia's laugh was dry. "As if Adrian Moretti has ever been appropriate for anything. Is he dangerous?" "Extremely, but not to you." The certainty in her grandmother's voice was absolute. Isabella turned to face her fully. "How can you be sure?" "Because I've known Adrian since he was a boy, barely older than you are now. Watched him grow from a street fighter with more anger than sense into a man who wields violence like a scalpel, precisely, and only when necessary." Julia met Isabella's eyes. "He's killed, yes. Probably more people than I want to know about. But he's never once hurt someone who didn't pose a threat. And he would die before he'd harm someone Lucia cares about. That's not exactly reassuring. It's honest, which is more than most people will give you." Julia wiped her hands on a towel, the movement slow and deliberate. "Your mother thinks she's protecting you by keeping Adrian at a distance, making sure you understand he's an associate, not a friend. Certainly not anything more." "I just met him, Nonna. I'm not thinking about anything more." "Aren't you?" Julia's smile was knowing. "You came home tonight thinking about a man who told you to be free. That's not nothing, Bella." Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks. It was one conversation. Some conversations change everything. Julia reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind Isabella's ear, the gesture achingly familiar. "Your grandfather and I had one conversation, 20 minutes in a bookshop during a rainstorm. I knew before we said goodbye that I was going to marry him." "That's different." "Why? Because we were young? Because it was romantic?" Julia shook her head. "Love doesn't care about circumstances, Tesoro. It shows up when it wants to, not when we're ready for it." "I'm not in love. I don't even know him." "No, but you're curious. And for someone who spent 4 years avoiding anything that reminds her of home, Curiosity is significant. Julia's expression grew serious. Just be careful. Adrian is a good man, but he's also a man who lives in shadows. Getting close to him means accepting darkness along with light. Mama would never allow it anyway. Your mother, Julia said carefully, wants you happy more than she wants you safe. She just hasn't figured out yet that those things might be the same. Before Isabella could respond, her phone buzzed. A message from her mother. Home safe? She typed back a quick affirmative and pocketed the device. When she looked up, Julia was watching her with an expression that seemed to contain all the wisdom of 8 decades compressed into a single glance. Go to bed, Bella. You look exhausted. So do you. I'm dying. I have an excuse. Julia's smile took the sting from the words. You're young and healthy and standing at the beginning of a story you haven't written yet. Don't waste it on an old woman's garden. This is exactly where I want to be. For now. But tomorrow, live your life. Promise me. Isabella kissed her grandmother's papery cheek. I promise. She left Julia in the greenhouse and made her way through the darkened villa to the bedroom that had been hers as a child. Nothing had changed. The same furniture, the same curtains, even the same books on the shelves. It was a museum to a girl who no longer existed, preserved perfectly by a mother who couldn't quite accept that children grew into strangers. Isabella fell asleep thinking about balconies and honest conversations, about the way Adrian Moretti had looked at her like she was a puzzle worth solving rather than a problem to be managed. She dreamed of greenhouses and cages made of light. The next 3 days followed a pattern that felt both comforting and claustrophobic. Mornings with her grandmother in the garden, working soil and talking about everything except the cancer that was slowly stealing her away. Afternoons at the hospital where Julia received treatments that bought time rather than cure. Evenings with her mother, carefully navigating conversations that felt like negotiations. Isabella saw Adrian exactly once during those 3 days, a brief glimpse across the hospital parking lot as she was helping her grandmother into the car. He'd been standing beside a black Mercedes, talking on his phone, but he'd looked up as if sensing her gaze. Their eyes had met for perhaps 3 seconds. He'd nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement that somehow felt weighted with meaning. Then Julia had needed help with her seatbelt, and when Isabella looked back, Adrian was gone. He does that, Julia had observed. Appears and disappears like smoke. Were you friends, you and him? We understood each other. That's rarer than friendship. Julia had settled back against the seat, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Adrian lost his family young, spent his teenage years fighting to survive. By the time he met your mother, he'd already become what the streets made him, hard, suspicious, dangerous. But Lucia saw past that, saw the boy underneath the armor. And you? I saw a young man who desperately needed someone to tell him he was more than his worst moments. Julia had closed her eyes. So I did, repeatedly. Whether he believed me or not, I'm not sure, but he kept coming back. Isabella had wanted to ask more, to understand the complicated web of relationships that connected her family to Adrian Moretti. But her grandmother had fallen asleep, leaving Isabella alone with questions that multiplied faster than she could contain them. On the 4th day, everything changed. It started with her mother's announcement at breakfast. I have business in Rome this weekend. 2 days? Maybe 3? Isabella looked up from her coffee. What kind of business? The kind that keeps our family secure. Lucia's tone suggested the subject was closed. You'll stay here with your grandmother. Maria will be around if you need anything. Maria was the housekeeper, a woman who'd been with the family for 30 years and had the maternal instincts of a drill sergeant. Isabella loved her, but the idea of spending 3 days under her watchful eye felt suffocating. I'm 23, Mama. I don't need a babysitter. I didn't say you did. I said Maria will be available if you need anything. Lucia set down her espresso cup with precise control. Adrian will also be checking in. And there it was, the real reason for the announcement. Isabella felt irritation kindle in her chest. Absolutely not. It's not up for discussion. I'm an adult. I don't need someone checking in on me. You're an adult in a city where your family name makes you a target. Lucia's expression hardened into the mask Isabella knew well, the face of a woman who'd built an empire and would tolerate no dissent. Adrian will make sure you're safe. That's the end of it. And if I refuse? Then I don't go to Rome, which means the deal I've been negotiating for 6 months falls apart, which means we lose leverage we can't afford to lose. Lucia leaned forward. Is that what you want? To sabotage our family's security because you're too proud to accept protection? It was manipulation, pure and simple. Lucia Valenti knew exactly which buttons to push to make her daughter comply, and Isabella hated that it was working. Fine, she bit out, but I don't want him hovering. If he's going to check in, it can be a phone call. That's between you and Adrian. Lucia stood, smoothing her skirt. I leave tonight. Be good. She left before Isabella could formulate a response sharp enough to match her frustration. The day passed in restless increments. Isabella tried to focus on medical journals she'd brought from Boston, but her concentration kept fracturing. By evening, she was pacing the villa like a caged animal, her earlier conversation with her mother replaying on an endless loop. She was so lost in her own head that she nearly missed the sound of a car in the driveway. By the time she reached the window, her mother was already gone, disappeared into the back of a town car that pulled away with the smooth efficiency of long practice. Isabella stood watching taillights fade into distance and felt the walls close in. She lasted exactly 40 minutes before Rebellion won. The nightclub was in the Navigli district, tucked between restaurants and boutiques that catered to tourists and wealthy locals in equal measure. Isabella had heard about it from one of the nurses at the hospital, a place where the music was good and the crowd was young and no one cared who your family was or what they did. She dressed carefully, trading the designer clothes her mother preferred for jeans and a simple black top that let her disappear into anonymity. Her hair was down, minimal makeup, no jewelry. She looked like any other 23-year-old looking for a night out. The club was exactly what she'd hoped for: dark, loud, packed with people who were there to dance and drink and forget whatever responsibilities waited for them in daylight. Isabella ordered a drink at the bar and let the bass vibrate through her bones, felt the press of bodies around her like proof that she existed outside her family's expectations. For the first time since returning to Milan, she felt like she could breathe. She was on her second drink, laughing at something the bartender had said, when a hand settled on her lower back with proprietary familiarity. There you are, Bella. I've been looking everywhere for you. Isabella turned to find a man she didn't recognize. Mid-30s, expensive suit, cologne that probably cost more than her outfit. His smile was too wide, his hand still on her back despite her obvious tension. I think you have me confused with someone else, she said, stepping away. His hand followed. Don't be like that. Your friend said you were waiting for me. I don't have a friend here, and I'm definitely not waiting for you. Isabella's medical training kicked in, assessing the situation with clinical detachment. His pupils were dilated, jaw tight, cocaine probably. His grip was strong, but not yet painful. Exit routes: front door crowded, back exit through the kitchen, likely faster. Come on, don't be difficult. His other hand came up to her arm. Let's go somewhere quieter, get to know each other. Let go of me. Isabella kept her voice level despite the adrenaline starting to flood her system. I said... The man's words cut off abruptly as a hand closed around his wrist, the grip clearly painful from the way his face contorted. Isabella looked up to find Adrian Moretti beside them, his expression absolutely neutral in a way that was somehow more terrifying than anger. The lady asked you to let go, Adrian said quietly. The club's volume meant Isabella had to strain to hear him, but the man currently held in Adrian's grip had no such difficulty. This is none of your business, old man. See, that's where you're wrong. Adrian's grip tightened fractionally, and Isabella heard bones grind. Everything concerning Dr. Valenti is my business. Now, you can walk away, and we'll forget this happened. Or you can escalate, and I'll make sure you don't walk anywhere for a very long time. The threat was delivered with the same conversational tone someone might use to discuss the weather. The man's face went pale, recognition and fear flickering across his features in rapid succession. I didn't know. Now you do. Adrian released him with a slight push that sent the man stumbling backward into the crowd. Go. He went, disappearing into the mass of bodies with the speed of a man who just realized how close he'd come to something dangerous. Adrian turned to Isabella, and for the first time since appearing beside her, his expression shifted into something almost human. Are you all right? I had it handled. I'm sure you did, but you shouldn't have to. His dark eyes scanned her face, looking for signs of distress or injury. What are you doing here, Isabella? What does it look like? I'm having a drink. It looks like you're trying to give your mother a heart attack. Adrian nodded toward the door. Come on, I'm taking you home. Absolutely not, I just got here. And now you're leaving. This isn't a negotiation. Isabella felt her temper, already frayed from days of careful control, finally snap. You don't get to tell me what to do. I don't care if my mother asked you to watch over me. I'm an adult, and I'll go where I want, when I want. Even if it puts you in danger. One drunk asshole doesn't constitute danger. That drunk asshole's name is Carlo Bernardi. His uncle runs protection rackets in this district. You rejecting him publicly is an insult his family will hear about. Adrian's voice remained level, but steel threaded through every word. So yes, Dr. Valenti, it constitutes danger. Now, are you going to come willingly, or do I need to carry you out? You wouldn't dare. The slight smile that crossed his face was answer enough. Isabella had no doubt whatsoever that Adrian Moretti would absolutely throw her over his shoulder and walk out of this club without a second thought. Fine, she snapped, but I'm finishing my drink first. You have 30 seconds. Isabella drained the glass in 2 long swallows, slammed it down on the bar with enough force to make the bartender wince, and stalked toward the exit without waiting to see if Adrian followed. He did, of course, silent as a shadow and twice as persistent. The night air was cool after the club's humidity. Isabella stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, vibrating with frustration and residual adrenaline. How did you even find me? She demanded. I have people who keep track of things I care about. Adrian gestured toward a car parked half a block away. And before you ask, yes, that means I knew the moment you left the villa. That's creepy. That's protection. There's a difference. He started walking toward the car. Are you coming, or would you prefer to stand here arguing until someone else decides to test their luck? Isabella wanted to refuse, to stand her ground, to prove that she didn't need anyone managing her safety. But the encounter with Carlo Bernardi had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, and the idea of being alone on a Milan street at midnight suddenly felt less like freedom and more like foolishness. She followed Adrian to the car, a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than most people's houses. He opened the passenger door, waited until she was settled, then closed it with careful control. The interior smelled like leather and the faint ghost of cigarette smoke. Adrian slid behind the wheel and pulled into traffic with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime navigating these streets. They drove in silence for several minutes, the city sliding past in ribbons of light and shadow. Isabella stared out the window, watching Milan transform from the vibrant nightlife of Nevigli to the quieter residential streets that led toward the hills. You're angry, Adrian observed finally. Perceptive. Want to tell me why? Because everyone keeps treating me like I'm fragile, like I can't be trusted to make my own decisions without someone standing guard. Your mother worries. My mother suffocates. Isabella turned to face him. And now she's enlisted you to do it for her while she's in Rome. She asked me to make sure you're safe. That's not the same as controlling you. Isn't it? You just dragged me out of a club because you decided it was dangerous. It was dangerous, Adrian said calmly. You don't know these people, Isabella. Don't understand the dynamics. That man you rejected? His family takes insults personally. Tomorrow morning, his uncle will hear that Carlo got embarrassed in public. And unless someone makes it very clear that you're under protection, they'll see you as an easy target. For what? Leverage. Revenge. Entertainment. Pick one. Adrian's hands tightened fractionally on the steering wheel. The Bernardi family doesn't distinguish between combatants and civilians. If they think hurting you will send a message to your mother, they'll do it without hesitation. The casual certainty in his voice was chilling. Isabella had grown up knowing her family operated in dangerous circles, but she'd been carefully sheltered from the details. Her mother had made sure of that, building walls between Isabella's world and the violence that funded it. So what happens now? She asked quietly. Now, I make sure the Bernardis understand you're off limits. That touching you means going through me, which most people are smart enough not to try. He glanced at her. You'll be safe, Isabella. I promise you that. At what cost? Does it matter? Yes. She studied his profile in the dashboard lights, the strong jaw, the lines around his eyes, the silver at his temples that somehow made him look distinguished rather than old. If people get hurt because of me, then they get hurt because they made a choice that had consequences. This isn't your responsibility. Adrian's voice softened slightly. You wanted a night out. That's not a crime. But this world doesn't allow for innocence, even when it should. That's bleak. That's honest. They fell silent again, but this time the quiet felt less hostile and more contemplative. Isabella found herself studying Adrian's hands on the wheel, noting the scars that marked his knuckles, the careful control in every movement. These were hands that had built and destroyed in equal measure, hands that could break bones or handle rosemary cuttings with her grandmother in a greenhouse. The contradiction fascinated her. Why did you agree? She asked. When my mother asked you to watch over me, why say yes? Adrian was quiet for so long Isabella thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested the words cost him something. Because 20 years ago, Lucia Valenti saved my life. I was 28, stupid, and in debt to people who don't accept late payments. She paid what I owed and asked for nothing in return except loyalty. He turned onto the private road that led to the villa. I've been paying that debt ever since, and if she asks me to protect her daughter, I protect her daughter. Even from herself? Especially from herself. The ghost of a smile crossed his face. You're more like Lucia than you realize. Same stubbornness, same refusal to accept limitations. She nearly got herself killed a dozen times in those early years. I was usually the one pulling her back from the edge. And now you're doing the same for me. If necessary. Adrian pulled up to the villa and killed the engine. But I'd prefer you make it unnecessary. By staying locked in my grandmother's house like a good little girl? By picking your battles? By understanding that freedom without wisdom is just recklessness with better marketing? He turned to face her fully. You want to live your own life? I support that. But living your own life doesn't mean throwing yourself into danger to prove a point. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just wanted one night where I wasn't Lucia Valenti's daughter or Giulia Conti's granddaughter. Where I was just Isabella. Understanding flickered in Adrian's dark eyes. I know that feeling. Do you? Everyone knows who you are. You can't exactly blend into a crowd. No, he agreed. But I remember what it was like to want to wish I could be someone other than the person circumstances made me. His expression grew distant. That hunger for anonymity, for freedom from expectation, it never really goes away. You just learn to carry it better. Isabella felt something shift in her chest, some wall crumbling that she hadn't realized she'd built. Here was someone who understood not just intellectually but viscerally what it meant to be trapped by a name, by history, by the weight of other people's needs. How do you do it? She asked quietly. Carry it, I mean. I find moments of choice wherever I can, small freedoms that belong only to me. Adrian's smile was slight but genuine. And I protect the people who make me feel human instead of just useful. Is that what my mother does? Make you feel human? Lucia reminds me that I'm capable of loyalty beyond survival instinct, that I can choose to serve something other than my own interests. He paused. Your grandmother reminds me that gentleness isn't weakness, and you... He trailed off, seeming to catch himself before saying something he couldn't take back. Me what? Isabella prompted. Adrian's gaze held hers for a long moment, something unreadable moving through his dark eyes. You remind me that hope isn't just for the young, he said finally, that it's possible to start over, even when the world says you're too old or too damaged or too far gone. The admission hung between them, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with physical proximity. Isabella's heart was beating too fast, her breath shallow, and she couldn't quite identify the emotion flooding through her system. Not fear, not anger, something far more dangerous. I should go inside, she managed. You should. But Adrian didn't move, didn't look away, didn't break the connection that had formed between them like a live wire. Isabella forced herself to reach for the door handle, to step out of the car, to put distance between them before she did something irreversible. Thank you for the ride, and for earlier, at the club. Any time. Adrian's voice was rough around the edges. Isabella? She paused, halfway to the villa's entrance. Yes? Next time you want a night out, ask me. I know places where you can be anonymous without being vulnerable. It was an offer, an olive branch, maybe even something more. Isabella nodded once and fled into the villa before she could examine too closely what acceptance might mean. She made it to her room before her hands started shaking. Isabella didn't sleep that night. She lay in her childhood bed watching moonlight track across the ceiling, replaying every word of their conversation, dissecting every pause and inflection for meaning that might not exist. You remind me that hope isn't just for the young. The words echoed in her mind, intimate and dangerous in equal measure. She thought about the way Adrian had looked at her in the car, the careful distance he'd maintained even as something electric hummed in the space between them. She thought about his hands on the steering wheel, scarred and steady, about the way he'd materialized at that club, like he'd known exactly where she'd be and what she'd need. By the time dawn broke over the hills, Isabella had convinced herself that she'd imagined the entire thing, that whatever she'd felt in that car was projection, loneliness, the inevitable consequence of returning to a city that felt simultaneously foreign and suffocating. She was wrong. Adrian showed up at the villa 3 hours later with coffee and pastries from a bakery Isabella had loved as a child. Maria answered the door, took one look at him, and stepped aside without question. That alone told Isabella exactly how much power Adrian Moretti wielded in her mother's world. She found him in the kitchen, setting out cups with the careful precision of a man who'd learned to be useful in domestic spaces despite being built for violence. "You remembered," she said, nodding at the pastries. "Your grandmother mentioned them." Adrian poured coffee with practiced ease. "She said you used to make her drive across the city every Sunday for cornetti from this specific bakery." "I was 8. Everything felt like an adventure." Isabella accepted the cup he offered, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The contact was brief but felt significant, like touching a live wire. "What are you doing here, Adrian?" "Keeping my promise to your mother, and—" He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "Making sure last night didn't scare you away from taking chances." "It takes more than one grabby drunk to scare me." "Good. But in case you were wondering, Carlo Bernardi won't be a problem anymore." Isabella's coffee stopped halfway to her mouth. "What did you do?" "Had a conversation with his uncle. Explained that you're under my protection and that any future incidents would be taken personally." Adrian's expression was neutral, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "The Bernardis are ambitious, not stupid. They understand consequences." "You threatened them." "I clarified boundaries. There's a difference." He took a sip of his own coffee, then set the cup down with deliberate care. "This is what your mother pays me for, Isabella. Managing threats before they become problems." "That's not what she pays you for. You said you owe her loyalty, not that she employs you." "Loyalty. Employment. 6 of 1. But there was something evasive in his tone, something that suggested the distinction mattered more than he wanted to admit. Isabella studied him across the kitchen counter, this man who'd become central to her thoughts in the space of a week. He was dressed more casually today, dark jeans, a black sweater that emphasized his shoulders, leather jacket draped over the back of a chair. Without the armor of a suit, he looked both more dangerous and somehow more human. "My grandmother wants to see you," she said abruptly. Adrian's eyebrows rose. "Does she?" "She's in the greenhouse. Asked for you specifically when I mentioned you'd brought coffee." Isabella wasn't sure why she was telling him this. What instinct was driving her to facilitate this connection? "She doesn't have many good days left. If you want to see her—" She didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. Adrian's expression shifted into something that looked almost like grief. "I'll go to her now." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Will you come?" It wasn't a demand or even really a request, more like an invitation extended without expectation of acceptance. Isabella found herself nodding before she'd consciously decided. They walked to the greenhouse in silence, fallen leaves crunching under their feet. The morning was cool and bright, the kind of autumn day that made Milan feel like a city from a painting rather than a living, breathing place with teeth. Julia was exactly where Isabella had left her an hour earlier, hands deep in soil, working a cutting that would outlive her by decades if it took root. "Adrian," she said without looking up, "I wondered when you'd come." "Julia," Adrian's voice gentled in a way Isabella had never heard, losing its edge entirely. "You're looking well." "I'm looking like death warmed over, and we both know it." Julia finally glanced up, her sharp eyes taking in both Adrian and her granddaughter with equal measure. "But I appreciate the lie. Sit, both of you." They sat on the stone bench that ran along one wall of the greenhouse. Isabella found herself pressed close to Adrian's side, the space too small for proper distance. She could feel the heat of him through his sweater, smell the faint scent of smoke and something darker, more complicated. Isabella tells me you've been keeping her safe, Julia said, returning her attention to the rosemary cutting. Trying to. Adrian's tone suggested this was harder than it should be. And how's that going? She snuck out to a nightclub in Navigli last night, attracted the wrong kind of attention. I had to extract her before things escalated. He said it without judgment, just stating facts. Julia laughed, the sound rough but genuine. Of course she did. Takes after her mother that way. Never could resist poking the bear. She pressed soil around the cutting with arthritic fingers. Did you hurt the man who touched her? Not yet, but I made sure he understood that next time I would. Good. Julia dusted off her hands and turned to face them fully. The greenhouse light carved her features in sharp relief, making her look simultaneously ancient and ageless. Isabella, would you give us a moment? There's something I need to discuss with Adrian, privately. Isabella wanted to argue, to insist that she had a right to hear whatever her grandmother needed to say. But the look Julia gave her was one that had been commanding obedience since Isabella was a child learning not to touch the roses. Of course, Nonna. She stood, trying not to feel like she was being dismissed. I'll be in the house if you need me. She made it halfway across the garden before curiosity overrode propriety. The greenhouse windows were old, the glass warped with age, but if she positioned herself just right behind a hedge of lavender, she could see them both in profile. Julia was speaking, her face animated despite the exhaustion that hollowed her cheeks. Adrian listened with complete focus, his expression cycling through surprise, resistance, and finally something that looked like resignation. Then Julia reached out and took Adrian's hand, a gesture so maternal, so tender, that Isabella felt like she was intruding on something sacred. Adrian's head dropped, his shoulders curving inward, and for just a moment he looked less like Milan's most feared enforcer and more like a lost boy seeking absolution. Isabella turned away, guilt and something she couldn't quite name churning in her chest. Whatever was happening in that greenhouse, it wasn't meant for her eyes. She was in her grandmother's library, pretending to read medical journals, when Adrian found her 20 minutes later. Your grandmother wants to rest, he said from the doorway. I helped her back to her room. Thank you. Isabella set down the journal she hadn't been reading. What did she say to you? That's between us. But his expression had changed, become somehow both harder and more vulnerable. She's dying, Isabella. You know that, right? Not in the abstract, eventual way. Soon. I'm a doctor. I understand terminal diagnoses. Understanding professionally isn't the same as accepting personally. Adrian moved into the library, his presence making the book-lined room feel smaller. When she's gone, you're going to want to remember these days. Not the endings, but the conversations. The moments where she was still herself. Is that what this is? Her trying to tie up loose ends before she goes? Maybe. Or maybe she's trying to make sure the people she loves don't destroy themselves after she's gone. He picked up a book from the side table, examined the cover without really seeing it. She made me promise something. Isabella's pulse quickened. What? To look after you. Not just keep you safe from external threats, but to make sure you don't lose yourself trying to be what everyone else needs you to be. Adrian set the book down with careful precision. She seems to think we understand each other. That I might be the only person who can see you clearly. That's presumptuous. Is it? His dark eyes found hers, and the intensity there made breathing difficult. Because from where I'm standing, she's right. I do see you, Isabella, the brilliant doctor who saves lives, the dutiful daughter trying to honor her family, the woman desperate to break free but terrified of what freedom might cost. I see all of it. You don't know me. I know you better than you think. Adrian moved closer, close enough that Isabella had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. I know you came back to Milan out of love, but you're counting the days until you can leave again. I know you resent your mother's control, but you're afraid that choosing yourself means abandoning everyone who needs you. I know you're curious about me in ways that scare you because acting on that curiosity would complicate everything. Isabella's breath caught. You're wrong. Am I? He reached out, his hand coming up to cup her face with devastating gentleness. Tell me I'm wrong, Isabella. Tell me you haven't been thinking about me since that night on the balcony, that you didn't feel it too in the car last night, That moment where everything shifted and we both knew we were standing on the edge of something we shouldn't want. She should have stepped back, should have denied it, laughed it off, reminded him that he was her mother's associate and she was barely home a week, and this was impossible for 1,000 different reasons. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes closing as his thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone. "This is a bad idea," she whispered. "Terrible," he agreed. "My mother would never forgive either of us." "Probably not." "You're too old for me. The city would talk. It would complicate everything." "Yes." His other hand came up, framing her face between his palms. "And I should walk away right now, should honor my promise to Lucia by keeping you safe from me most of all." "Then why aren't you?" Isabella's eyes opened, meeting his. "Because your grandmother asked me to help you live, not just survive. And walking away from this, from you, feels like choosing survival over living." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I'm 50 years old, Isabella. I've made peace with dying alone, with never having this kind of connection. And then you stepped onto a balcony and looked at me like I was a person instead of a weapon, and suddenly survival doesn't feel like enough anymore." Adrian, whatever she'd been about to say dissolved as he leaned down, his forehead coming to rest against hers. They stood like that, breathing the same air, balanced on a knife's edge between restraint and surrender. "Tell me to leave," Adrian said roughly. "Tell me this ends here, and I'll walk away. I'll keep you safe from a distance. I'll honor my promise to your mother without ever touching you again." Isabella knew what she should say, knew the smart choice, the safe choice, the choice that wouldn't detonate her life and her family and everything she was supposed to want. She made a different choice. "Stay." The word was barely audible, but it shattered whatever restraint had been holding Adrian back. His mouth found hers with a hunger that stole her breath, his hand sliding into her hair as he pulled her closer. Isabella's response was immediate and incendiary, years of careful control burning away in the space of a heartbeat. She'd kissed men before, careful kisses with appropriate boyfriends, pleasant but forgettable. This was something else entirely. This was annihilation and creation happening simultaneously, every nerve ending coming alive with terrifying intensity. Adrian kissed like he did everything else, with complete focus and devastating precision. His hands mapped her body through her clothes, learning her shape, testing her responses. When Isabella gasped against his mouth, he swallowed the sound and deepened the kiss until she was clinging to him for balance. Time fragmented. One moment they were standing in the library. The next, Adrian had backed her against the bookshelf, books tumbling forgotten to the floor as he pressed against her. Isabella's hands fisted in his sweater, pulling him impossibly closer, desperate for more contact, more heat, more of everything this man was offering. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against the bookshelf above her shoulder, his body caging hers in. "We can't do this," he said, but his hands were still on her waist, thumbs tracing circles against her hip bones through her clothes. "I know." Isabella's voice was wrecked, desire making it rough and unfamiliar. "Your mother will kill me. Probably. This will destroy everything, our families, our obligations, any chance at normalcy." "Yes." Isabella pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "Are you trying to talk yourself out of this or convince me we should stop?" Adrian's laugh was dark and self-deprecating. "Both, neither. I don't know anymore." He stepped back, putting distance between them that felt painful. "I need you to understand what this means, Isabella. What being with me would cost you." "Tell me then." "It means accepting that I've killed people, that I'll probably kill again. It means understanding that the money that funds your family's empire, that paid for your medical school, that keeps your grandmother comfortable in her final days, it comes from sources that would horrify you if you looked too closely." Adrian's expression was bleak. "It means living in a world where violence is always just beneath the surface, where every relationship is transactional and trust is a commodity more valuable than gold." "I know what my family is, Adrian. I'm not naive." "Knowing and experiencing aren't the same thing. You've been sheltered from the worst of it. Your mother made sure of that." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "If we do this, if we cross this line, there's no going back. Your mother will see it as betrayal. The city will see you as either my weakness or my prize, and you'll lose the option of ever being just Isabella again." "What if I don't want to be just Isabella? The question surprised them both. What if I'm tired of being protected and sheltered and kept separate from the reality of where I come from? Then you're more like your mother than either of you realizes. Adrian's smile was slight and sad. Lucia spent years trying to give you choices she never had, and you're choosing to walk into the same darkness she tried to keep you from. Or maybe I'm choosing to walk towards something worth the risk. Isabella closed the distance between them, her hand coming up to rest over his heart. She could feel it beating hard and fast beneath her palm. You said, I remind you that hope isn't just for the young. What if you remind me that I don't have to choose between the life I built and the life I was born into? What if there's a way to have both? There isn't. Not in this world. Then maybe we build a different world. She stood on her toes, pressing a soft kiss to his jaw. Or maybe we stop pretending we have a choice about this and see where it leads. Adrian's control wavered visibly. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and for a long moment they just held each other in the library, surrounded by books and broken boundaries. This is going to end badly, he said into her hair. Maybe. Or maybe it ends exactly how it's supposed to. Isabella pulled back enough to meet his eyes. My grandmother is dying, Adrian. Every day I watch her fade a little more, and it's teaching me that life is too short to spend it being safe. Your grandmother is the one who asked me to look after you. And you are, by letting me make my own choices, even the dangerous ones. She touched his face, mirroring the way he'd touched hers earlier. Don't walk away from this because you think it's what my mother would want. Don't walk away because you think you're protecting me. If you walk away, do it because you don't want this. That's the problem. Adrian caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. I want this more than I've wanted anything in 20 years, which is exactly why I should leave. But you won't. No, he admitted. Apparently, I won't. They stood there for a long moment, the decision made and unmade and made again in the space between heartbeats. Then Adrian was kissing her again, slower this time, but no less intense, and Isabella let herself fall into it without reservation or regret. When they finally broke apart for the second time, the light in the library had shifted, suggesting hours had passed when it felt like only minutes. I need to go, Adrian said reluctantly. I have meetings I can't miss, but tomorrow... He paused, seeming to wrestle with himself. There's a place I go sometimes, when the city feels too small and the weight of everything gets to be too much. Would you like to see it? Yes. Isabella didn't hesitate. I'll pick you up at 10. Dress casually. He pulled away from her entirely, immediately looking more composed, more controlled, but his eyes were still dark with want, still holding promises he hadn't yet spoken aloud. He made it to the library door before turning back. Isabella? Yes? Whatever happens next, whatever this becomes, know that I'm choosing this. Choosing you. Despite every reason I shouldn't. Then he was gone, leaving Isabella alone with her racing heart and the certain knowledge that her life had just tilted irrevocably off its axis. She found her grandmother awake when she went to check on her later that evening. Julia was propped up in bed, looking exhausted but satisfied in a way that suggested she knew exactly what had transpired in the library. You spoke with Adrian, Julia said. It wasn't a question. We spoke. Miss Isabella sat on the edge of the bed, taking her grandmother's frail hand. And you orchestrated it. Don't pretend you didn't. I may have nudged you both in a direction you were already heading. Julia's smile was knowing. Are you angry? I should be. You manipulated us. I gave you permission. There's a difference. Julia squeezed Isabella's hand with surprising strength. You've been circling each other since that night on the balcony. Both of you too stubborn and too scared to acknowledge what was obvious to everyone else. Mama's going to be furious. Your mother will survive. She's survived worse. Julia's expression grew serious. Adrian is a good man, Isabella. Complicated, yes. Damaged, certainly. But good in the ways that matter. He'll never lie to you, never manipulate you, never try to make you smaller to feel bigger himself. How can you be sure? Because I've known him for 20 years, watched him choose honor over easy profits, loyalty over self-interest, protection over power. The city sees a killer. I see a man who's never once compromised on the things he believes in. Julia paused, gathering strength. Your mother sees him as a weapon she can aim, but Adrian Moretti is a shield, not a sword. And you, my darling, need someone who will stand between you and the world rather than someone who will control it for you. I barely know him. You know him better than you think, and what you don't know, you'll learn. Julia's eyes were starting to close, exhaustion winning over determination. Love isn't about time, Tesoro. It's about recognition, about finding someone whose damage fits yours in all the right ways. I'm not in love with him. Not yet, Julia agreed, already drifting toward sleep. But you will be. And when you are, remember that the best love stories are the ones everyone said were impossible. Isabella sat with her grandmother until her breathing evened into sleep, then made her way back to her own room. She stood at the window looking out over the gardens, thinking about choices and consequences, about the difference between safety and living. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. "How are things there? Is Adrian checking in?" Isabella stared at the words for a long time before typing back, "Everything's fine. He's been very attentive." It wasn't a lie, exactly, just a truth told at an angle that hid more than it revealed. She fell asleep that night thinking about tomorrow, about wherever Adrian was planning to take her, about the fact that for the first time since returning to Milan, she was looking forward to something instead of counting down until she could leave. The next morning arrived wrapped in rain, the kind of steady downpour that turned Milan gray and made the cobblestones slick as glass. Isabella dressed in jeans and a sweater as instructed, practical boots that could handle wet streets, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Adrian arrived exactly at 10, driving a different car this time, a vintage Alfa Romeo that probably belonged in a museum rather than on city streets. He was dressed down in jeans and a leather jacket, looking younger somehow, without the formal clothes that marked him as dangerous. "Where are we going?" Isabella asked as she slid into the passenger seat. "You'll see." Adrian pulled away from the villa with the kind of confidence that suggested he knew every curve of these roads by heart. "Trust me?" It was a weighted question, asking for more than just faith in their destination. Isabella met his eyes and made another choice that would have consequences she couldn't yet predict. "Yes," she said, "I trust you." The smile that crossed Adrian's face was small but genuine, warming him from within in a way that made him look almost happy. They drove north out of the city, leaving behind the noise and crowds for smaller roads that wound through countryside painted in autumn colors. The rain followed them, steady and relentless, turning the world into watercolor washes of amber and green. Adrian didn't speak, seemingly content to let the silence stretch between them. Isabella found herself relaxing into it, watching his hands on the wheel, the way he navigated the roads with unconscious grace. After an hour, he turned onto a nearly invisible track that led up into hills thick with chestnut trees. The car bumped over ruts and stones, climbing higher until they broke through the tree line into a clearing that looked out over valleys painted in mist and rain. There was a cottage here, small, stone, probably centuries old. Smoke curled from this chimney despite the rain, suggesting someone had been here recently preparing it. "What is this place?" Isabella asked as Adrian killed the engine. "Mine." He said it simply, without pride or apology. "The only thing I own that has nothing to do with your mother, or the business, or Milan. I bought it 15 years ago when I needed somewhere to remember who I was before I became what the city made me." He got out of the car, and Isabella followed, rain immediately soaking into her sweater. Adrian unlocked the cottage door and gestured her inside. The interior was simple but comfortable. A main room with a fireplace, a small kitchen, a loft bedroom visible through an open doorway. It smelled like wood smoke and rain and solitude. "It's beautiful," Isabella said, meaning it. "It's honest." Adrian moved to the fireplace, adding wood to coals that were still glowing from earlier preparation. "No pretense here, no performance. Just a place where I can be something other than Adrian Moretti, enforcer and killer." "What are you here?" He looked at her over his shoulder, the firelight catching in his dark eyes. "I don't know yet. I've never brought anyone here before." The admission hung between them, significant and terrifying in equal measure. This wasn't just Adrian showing her a place he liked. This was him offering her access to the parts of himself he kept hidden from everyone else. Isabella moved to the window, looking out at rain and valleys and the kind of isolation that felt both liberating and dangerous. "Why me? Why now?" "Because your grandmother is dying and she made me promise to help you live. Because you walked into my life and reminded me what hope feels like. Because I'm 50 years old and tired of surviving when I could be living. Adrian came to stand behind her, close enough that she could feel his heat, but not touching. Because for the first time in 20 years, I want something that's mine instead of something I'm protecting for someone else. Isabella turned to face him, her back against the rain-streaked window. And you think I could be yours? I think we could be each other's. If we're brave enough. If we're willing to accept the cost. What cost? Everything. Adrian finally closed the distance between them, his hand settling on her waist. Your mother's trust, the city's respect, any illusion that we can control how this story ends. That's a high price. Too high? His eyes searched hers, looking for doubt or fear. Isabella thought about Boston, about the careful life she'd built there, about the safety of being unknown. She thought about her mother's expectations, her grandmother's blessing, the weight of a name she'd never asked for. And she thought about this man who saw her clearly and still chose to stay, who offered her truth instead of pretty lies, who was willing to risk everything for something that might not survive its first real test. No, she said, reaching up to pull him down to her. Not too high at all. This time, when they kissed, there was no library to contain them, no family watching, no world demanding they be anything other than exactly what they were. Two people choosing each other, despite every reason they shouldn't. Adrian lifted her easily, carrying her up the narrow stairs to the loft bedroom. He laid her down on sheets that smelled like rain and wood smoke, his body covering hers with careful weight. Are you sure? He asked, even as his hands worked open the buttons of her shirt. I've never been more sure of anything. Isabella pulled him back down to her, done with talking, done with thinking, ready to burn every bridge if it meant having this. Outside, rain fell steadily on ancient stones and chestnut trees. Inside, Isabella Valenti and Adrian Moretti crossed a line that would change both their lives irrevocably, choosing desire over duty, passion over propriety, each other over every safe thing they'd ever known. And somewhere in Milan, in a villa on a hill, a dying woman smiled in her sleep, knowing she'd given her granddaughter the greatest gift she had left to offer, permission to choose love over legacy, no matter what it cost. They stayed in the cottage until the rain stopped and the world outside turned golden with late afternoon light filtering through breaking clouds. Isabella lay in Adrian's arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat and trying to reconcile the tenderness of the last few hours with everything she thought she knew about the man holding her. What are you thinking? Adrian's voice rumbled through his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. That I don't know how we go back from this. Isabella propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. In the soft light, with his guard completely down, he looked younger than his 50 years, vulnerable in a way she suspected few people ever got to see. That everything's different now. It is. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. And we can't go back, only forward. Into what? Secret meetings in cottages while we pretend nothing's changed when we're in the city? If that's what you want. But something flickered across his expression. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation. Isabella sat up fully, pulling the sheet around herself. What do you want? Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face like he was memorizing it. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with honesty. I want to wake up with you every morning. I want to take you to dinner without hiding. I want everyone to know you chose me despite every reason you shouldn't have. He paused. But I also want you to have the life you built in Boston, the career you worked for, the freedom your mother tried to give you. And I don't know if you can have both those things in me. Maybe I don't want both those things anymore. The words surprised Isabella even as she said them, but they felt true. Boston was running away, building a life separate from my family because I was afraid of what being a Valenti meant. But I'm tired of running, Adrian. I'm tired of pretending I can be someone I'm not. You're a doctor. That's not pretending. That's who you are. It's part of who I am, but it's not all of it. Isabella shifted to face him fully, the sheet pooling around her waist. You told me I could build something different. What if different means accepting where I come from while choosing where I'm going? What if it means being both Dr. Valenti and Lucia Valenti's daughter? And Adrian Moretti's, he trailed off, seeming uncertain how to finish the sentence. Lover, partner, Isabella supplied. What would you call this? Everything. The word came out fierce and certain. I'd call you everything. The declaration hung between them, enormous and terrifying. Isabella felt her breath catch, felt the weight of what they were building settle around her shoulders like a physical thing. Then we tell my mother. The decision crystallized even as she spoke it. We stop hiding. We face whatever comes. Adrian sat up sharply, his expression shifting from tender to alarmed in an instant. Isabella, you don't understand what you're asking. Lucia will see this as betrayal of the worst kind. She trusted me to protect you, not seduce you. You didn't seduce me. I made a choice. She won't see it that way. She'll see a 50-year-old man who took advantage of her daughter. Adrian's jaw tightened. And she'd be right to see it that way. Stop. Isabella put her hand on his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palm. Stop deciding what I can handle. Stop protecting me from choices I want to make. She leaned in until they were eye to eye. I'm not a child, Adrian. I'm a 23-year-old woman who knows exactly what she's doing, and what I'm doing is choosing you. Even if it costs you your relationship with your mother? Yes. Isabella said it without hesitation, surprising herself with her own certainty. I love my mother, but I won't let her control my life out of fear. And I won't hide something real because it's inconvenient or uncomfortable or breaks the rules she set without asking me. Adrian's hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his chest. Your grandmother said you were stubborn. My grandmother orchestrated this entire thing. She wanted me to live, remember? To make my own choices. Isabella's smile was slight. I'm making them. Then we tell Lucia together. Adrian's expression was grim but resolved. When she gets back from Rome, we sit down with her and we're honest. No hiding, no excuses, just the truth. That we're together. That I'm in love with her daughter. Adrian pulled Isabella close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. And that I plan to be in her life for as long as she'll have me, regardless of what anyone else thinks about it. The words should have terrified Isabella. They'd known each other less than 2 weeks. This was too fast, too intense, too much by any rational measure. But nothing about this felt rational, and Isabella had spent her entire life being reasonable. I'm not ready to say I love you yet, she admitted. But I'm falling, fast and hard and probably foolishly. That's enough. Adrian's arms tightened around her. That's more than enough. They stayed in the cottage until dusk began to paint the hills in shades of purple and gold. Adrian made them dinner from supplies he kept stocked in the small kitchen. Pasta with fresh herbs, bread from a nearby village, wine that tasted like sunshine and earth. They ate by firelight and talked about everything except what was waiting for them back in Milan. Isabella learned that Adrian had grown up in the streets near Porta Venezia, that he'd lost his parents to violence before he was 12, that he'd survived by being faster and meaner and smarter than the other boys fighting for scraps. She learned that he'd joined the army at 17, spent 6 years learning how to kill efficiently, came home to find Milan had moved on without him, that he'd fallen into Lucia's orbit almost by accident, hired as muscle, and promoted to advisor when she'd recognized his strategic mind beneath the violence. She saved me, Adrian said quietly, staring into the fire. Not just financially. She gave me purpose beyond survival. Made me believe I could be something other than what the streets had made me. And now? Now I'm trying to figure out if I can be something more than what she needs me to be. He turned to look at Isabella. You make me want to try. They drove back to Milan as night fell completely, the city lights spreading below them like a fallen constellation. Adrian's hand found Isabella's across the center console, fingers lacing together with an ease that felt like they'd been doing this for years rather than hours. I need to drop you at the villa, he said as they descended into the city proper. Your mother lands tomorrow morning. She'll come straight to see you. And then we tell her. Adrian's grip tightened slightly. Isabella, I need you to prepare yourself. Lucia is going to be angry, more than angry. She's going to feel betrayed. She trusted me with what matters most to her, and I broke that trust. By caring about me? By wanting you in ways she specifically asked me not to. His expression was bleak. There were conditions to her request, explicit boundaries about what protection meant. I crossed all of them. Isabella processed this, feeling something cold settle in her stomach. She warned you away from me. She warned me that you were off limits in every way except professional protection, That my role was to keep you safe, not to become involved in your life. Adrian's voice was tight. I agreed to those terms, and then I violated them the moment you looked at me like I was human instead of just useful. So we both broke her rules. Isabella refused to feel guilty about this. She doesn't get to dictate who I care about. No, but she gets to decide whether she forgives me for breaking my word. Adrian pulled up to the villa's gates. I can live with her anger. I can live with losing her trust. What I can't live with is you caught in the middle of a war between the two people who matter most to you. Then we make sure there's no war. Isabella leaned across the console to kiss him, soft and deliberate. We tell her together. We show her this is real. We give her time to accept it. And if she doesn't, then we deal with that when it happens. Isabella pulled back, her hand coming up to touch his face. But I'm not giving you up to make her comfortable. I spent 4 years making myself smaller to keep peace. I'm done with that. Adrian caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. I'll be here at 9 tomorrow. We'll face her together. Isabella nodded and slipped out of the car, watching as he drove away into the night. She stood in the villa's driveway for a long moment, looking up at the house that held her dying grandmother and all the expectations she'd spent her life trying to meet. Then she went inside to spend what might be her last peaceful night before everything exploded. She found Julia awake in her bedroom, propped up on pillows and looking frailer than she had that morning. But her eyes were sharp when Isabella sat on the edge of the bed. You went with him, Julia said. Not a question. Yes. And everything's different now. Isabella took her grandmother's hand. We're telling Mama tomorrow. About us. Good. Julia's smile was satisfied. Secrets are poison. Better to lance the wound and let it bleed clean. She's going to be so angry, Nona. She's going to be terrified. There's a difference. Julia squeezed Isabella's hand with surprising strength. Your mother has controlled every variable in her life since she was younger than you are now. Built an empire on being 3 steps ahead of everyone. And now her daughter is in love with the one person she trusted absolutely, and she didn't see it coming. I'm not in love with him yet. You will be, probably are already, and just haven't admitted it to yourself. Julia's eyes were knowing. But that's not what will terrify Lucia. What will terrify her is that she can't protect you from this, can't control the outcome, can't guarantee it ends well. Nothing guarantees it ends well. Exactly, which is why she'll fight it with everything she has. Julia's expression grew serious. Be ready for that, Tesoro. Your mother loves you more than anything in this world. And when people we love make choices that scare us, we sometimes hurt them trying to save them from themselves. Are you saying I shouldn't do this? I'm saying you should do it with your eyes open. Julia paused, gathering strength. Adrian is a good man, but loving him will be complicated. His world is violent. His past is bloody. The people who fear him will try to use you against him. The people who hate him will see you as acceptable collateral damage. I know what I'm choosing. Do you? Because knowing intellectually and experiencing viscerally are very different things. Julia's grip tightened. The first time someone threatens you to control him, the first time you see him make a choice that horrifies you, the first time you realize the man you love has done things that would send other men to prison for life, that's when you'll really know if you can handle this. Isabella wanted to argue, to insist she understood exactly what she was getting into. But her grandmother's words struck too close to truth. She'd spent the day in a cottage with a tender lover who'd made her feel cherished and safe. She hadn't spent it with Milan's most feared enforcer, making the kind of decisions that kept her family powerful. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Good. Fear keeps you smart. Julia pulled Isabella down into an embrace. But don't let fear stop you from living. I've watched too many people choose safety over happiness, survival over joy. Promise me you won't be one of them. I promise. Isabella held her grandmother tight, feeling how fragile she'd become, how close to gone. I love you, Nona. I love you too, Tesoro. More than you'll ever know. Julia pulled back, her eyes glistening. Now go get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be brutal, and you'll need your strength. Isabella kissed her grandmother's cheek and retreated to her own room. She lay awake for hours, watching shadows move across the ceiling, preparing herself for the conversation that would either free her or fracture her family beyond repair. Her mother arrived at the villa at 8:30 the next morning, earlier than expected. Isabella heard the car in the driveway and felt her stomach twist with nerves. She'd dressed carefully, professional but not formal, making a statement without words that she was not a child to be managed. Lucia swept into the house like a storm system, all controlled energy and sharp edges. She looked tired from travel, but no less formidable, her dark eyes taking in everything with a single glance. "Isabella!" She pulled her daughter into a brief embrace. "How's your grandmother?" "Fading, but peaceful." Isabella stepped back, trying to read her mother's mood. "How was Rome?" "Successful, the deal is done." Lucia set down her bag and moved toward the kitchen. "Is there coffee? I need caffeine before I deal with everything that's accumulated while I was gone." Isabella followed her mother, her heart racing. Adrian would be here in 30 minutes. She needed to prepare Lucia to find the right words to soften the blow that was coming. "Mama, we need to talk." Something in Isabella's tone made Lucia pause, coffee cup halfway to her lips. Her eyes sharpened, focusing on her daughter with an intensity that made Isabella feel transparent. "What happened while I was gone?" "Nothing bad, just something important." Isabella took a breath. "Adrian's coming over this morning. We need to speak with you together." The temperature in the kitchen dropped about 20 degrees. Lucia set down her coffee with careful precision, each movement controlled in a way that suggested she was using every ounce of discipline not to react. "Adrian Moretti is coming here to speak with me, with you present." Lucia's voice was dangerously soft. "And you felt this required warning me in advance." "Yes, I see." Lucia's expression was absolutely neutral, which was somehow more terrifying than anger would have been. "And this conversation, does it concern the reason you've been glowing since I walked in? The reason you can't quite meet my eyes? The reason you're dressed like you're about to fight a battle?" Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks. Her mother had always been able to read her too well, see through every defense to the truth beneath. "We're together," she said simply. "Adrian and I. We wanted to tell you together, honestly, before you heard it from anyone else." The silence that followed was profound and terrible. Lucia stood absolutely still, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to identify. Shock, fury, betrayal, fear, all of it compressed into the space between heartbeats. When she finally spoke, her voice could have cut glass. "How long?" "It doesn't matter. How long?" Each word was its own sentence. "A few days since you left for Rome." Isabella forced herself to hold her mother's gaze. "But it started before that, at Vittorio's memorial. Something happened between us and we've been trying to deny it, but he seduced you anyway." Lucia's hands clenched into fists. "He had one job, one explicit boundary, and he crossed it the moment my back was turned." "He didn't seduce me, Mama. I made a choice." "You're 23 years old. You don't know what you want." "I know I want him." Isabella straightened her spine, refusing to be diminished. "I know that for the first time since I came home, I feel like I can breathe. Like I don't have to choose between being your daughter and being myself." "So this is my fault? I drove you into the arms of a man old enough to be your father?" Lucia's voice rose, control finally cracking. "A man who's killed more people than you've saved? Who lives in a world that would destroy you if you gave it half a chance?" "Adrian would never let anything destroy me." "Adrian is exactly what would destroy you." Lucia slammed her hand down on the counter hard enough to rattle the coffee cups. "Do you have any idea what you're asking for? What being with him would mean? The targets it would paint on your back? The enemies it would make you? I know what I'm choosing." "You know nothing!" Lucia's composure shattered completely, tears streaking down her face even as fury blazed in her eyes. "You think you understand because you grew up in this world, but you've been protected from the reality of it your entire life. I made sure of that. I built walls around you so you'd never have to see what I do to maintain our family's power." "Then maybe it's time I saw it." Isabella's voice was steady, despite the tears threatening her own eyes. "Maybe it's time I stopped being protected and started being trusted." "Trust?" Lucia laughed bitterly. "You want to talk about trust? I trusted Adrian Moretti with my most precious thing, and he betrayed me in the worst possible way. By caring about me. By wanting you. By looking at my daughter and seeing not someone to protect, but someone to possess." Lucia's voice broke. "He was supposed to keep you safe, Isabella, not fall in love with you." The admission hung in the air, an acknowledgement of what Lucia saw in Adrian's eyes, what she feared most. Before Isabella could respond, the front door opened. They both turned to find Adrian standing in the kitchen doorway, his expression carefully neutral despite the tension thick enough to choke on. "Lucia," he said quietly, "I see Isabella already told you." "Get out of my house." Lucia's voice was cold as winter. "Get out and stay away from my daughter." "No!" Adrian stepped fully into the kitchen, his hands loose at his sides, but his posture suggesting he was ready for whatever came. "You want to be angry at me. You want to assign blame me. But I won't walk away from Isabella because it makes you comfortable. You broke your word to me. I did, and I'd do it again." Adrian's dark eyes were steady on Lucia's. "You asked me to protect her. I'm protecting her from a life half-lived, from choosing safety over happiness, from becoming what you became, powerful and alone, and waking up at 50 realizing you traded everything that mattered for control." Lucia flinched like he'd struck her. "How dare you? How dare I tell the truth? How dare I point out that you're terrified not because Isabella chose me, but because you can't control this outcome?" Adrian's voice remained level, but steel ran through every word. "You wanted her to have choices you never did. She's making them. And it's killing you because you can't guarantee she won't get hurt." "She will get hurt. Being with you guarantees it." Lucia moved toward Adrian, fury and fear making her reckless. "The first time your enemies realize she matters to you, they'll come for her. And you know it. You know exactly how this ends." "Yes." Adrian didn't flinch, didn't look away. "I know the risks better than anyone, which is why I've already made arrangements to protect her, already reached out to everyone who might see her as leverage, already made it clear that touching Isabella Valenti means declaring war on me personally. That's not protection. That's making her a target." She was already a target the moment she was born a Valenti. Adrian's expression was bleak. "At least this way, she has someone willing to burn the world down to keep her safe." "I would burn the world for her." Lucia's voice cracked with emotion. "I have burned the world for her. Everything I've done, every compromise I've made, every sin I've committed, it was all to keep her safe." "I know." Adrian's voice softened fractionally. "And she's safe, Lucia. I swear to you on everything I have, on everything I am, I will protect her with my life. The same way I've protected you for 20 years. It's not the same." Tears streamed down Lucia's face now, unchecked and raw. "You protect me because I pay you. You want her because—" She broke off, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. "Because she makes me want to be better than I am," Adrian supplied quietly. "Because looking at her reminds me there's still good in this world worth protecting. Because, for the first time in my life, I found someone who sees all of me, the violence and the tenderness, the loyalty and the blood-stained hands, and chooses me anyway." Isabella had been silent through this entire exchange, watching two of the most important people in her life circle each other like wounded animals. But Adrian's words broke something open in her chest, and she couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Mama." She moved to stand between them, facing her mother. "I know you're scared. I know this isn't what you wanted for me, but I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you my choice. You're choosing him over your family. I'm choosing him and my family." Isabella took her mother's hands, holding tight even when Lucia tried to pull away. "I love you. Nothing about this changes that. But I love him too, or I'm going to, very soon. And I need you to find a way to accept that. And if I can't—" Lucia's voice was broken, all the power stripped away to reveal the terrified mother beneath. "Then we'll both lose, because I won't give him up, and I won't walk away from you either." Isabella's tears finally spilled over. "Please, Mama, please don't make me choose." Lucia looked at her daughter, then at Adrian standing silent and steady behind her. Something in her expression shifted. Not acceptance, not yet, but maybe the first crack in the wall. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to think about this without both of you staring at me like I'm the villain." "You're not the villain," Isabella said. "You're just scared." "I'm terrified." Lucia pulled her hands free and stepped back, putting distance between them. "I need you to leave, Adrian. Both of you. I need to see my mother, and I need to think." "Mama?" "Please, Isabella." Lucia's voice was exhausted, all the fight drained out of it. "Just give me space to process this. A few hours. Then we'll talk again." Isabella looked at Adrian, who nodded slightly. They'd pushed as hard as they could. Now they had to give Lucia room to decide whether she could live with what they were asking. They left the villa together, driving in silence until they were far enough away that Isabella could breathe again. Adrian pulled over in a park overlooking the city, and they sat watching Milan spread out below them like a puzzle still waiting to be solved. "That went better than I expected," Adrian said finally. Isabella laughed, the sound half sob. "She practically threw you out." But she didn't forbid it absolutely. She asked for time to think, which means part of her is already accepting this. Adrian reached over to take Isabella's hand. "Your mother is one of the strongest people I know. She'll find a way to make peace with this. Or she'll make both our lives hell until we give up." "Then we weather hell together." Adrian pulled her close, and Isabella let herself sink into his embrace. "I meant what I said in there. I'll protect you, Isabella, from external threats and from the fallout of choosing me, whatever it costs. I don't want you to protect me from consequences. I just want you to be with me while I face them." Isabella pulled back to look at him. "We're in this together, remember? Equal partners, not protector and protected." "Equal partners," Adrian agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead, "even when it's terrifying. Especially then." They stayed in the park until the sun climbed high, talking about what came next, making plans for a future that felt both impossible and inevitable. When Isabella's phone buzzed with a message from her grandmother asking her to come home, they drove back to the villa together. Julia was in the greenhouse again, her hands working soil despite the exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Lucia sat beside her on the stone bench, her face blotchy from crying but composed. Both women looked up as Isabella and Adrian entered. "Sit," Julia commanded, gesturing to the space beside her mother. "We need to talk, all of us." Isabella and Adrian sat, and for a long moment, no one spoke. The greenhouse air was humid and warm, smelling of earth and growing things, and the particular silence that comes before important words. Finally, Julia broke it. "Lucia," she said to her daughter, "do you remember what I told you when you wanted to marry Paolo? When everyone said he was too young, too idealistic, too soft for the world you lived in?" Lucia's expression flickered. "You said love was rare enough that trying to control it was like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you gripped, the more you'd lose. And was I right?" "Yes." Lucia's voice was barely above a whisper. "He was the best thing that ever happened to me, and I lost him anyway." You lost him because this world is cruel and random and takes what it wants, regardless of what we deserve." Julia reached over to take her daughter's hand. "But you had him. You loved him. And he gave you Isabella. Would you trade those years to avoid the pain of losing him?" "No." Lucia's tears started fresh. "Never. Then why would you deny your daughter the same chance? The same risk?" Julia's voice was gentle, but implacable. "Adrian isn't Paolo. He's harder, more dangerous, more likely to survive the violence that took your husband. But the love is just as real, and Isabella deserves the chance to choose it." "What if she gets hurt?" Lucia turned to look at her daughter. "What if loving him destroys her?" "Then it destroys her," Julia said simply. "And she puts herself back together, the same way you did. The same way every strong woman does when love doesn't work out the way they planned." She paused. "But what if it doesn't destroy her? What if it makes her stronger? What if Adrian is exactly what she needs to become everything she's capable of being?" Lucia looked at Adrian for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face for something Isabella couldn't identify. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy some internal question. "If you hurt her," Lucia said quietly, "I will destroy you, everything you've built, everyone you care about. I will burn it all down and salt the earth behind me." "I know," Adrian said simply, "and I'd expect nothing less. If you make her choose between you and her family, I won't. She loves you, Lucia. That's never going to change, regardless of what she feels for me. If you put her in danger, then I'll die getting her out of it." Adrian's voice was absolutely certain. "I swear to you on everything I am, Isabella's safety matters more to me than my own life. I will protect her with everything I have, always." The promise hung in the greenhouse air, weighted with the kind of certainty that couldn't be faked. Lucia studied Adrian's face for another long moment, then turned to her daughter. "Is this what you want?" she asked. "Not what you think you want, not what sounds exciting or different. Is this what your heart needs? Isabella thought about the question, really thought about it, stripped away the novelty and the rebellion and the thrill of doing something her mother didn't approve of. What was left underneath? Yes, she said finally. He makes me feel seen in ways no one else does, like I can be both Dr. Valenti and Lucia's daughter and just Isabella all at the same time. Like I don't have to choose between the pieces of myself to be whole. And when his world touches yours, when the violence gets too close, when you see him make choices that horrify you, then I'll deal with it, with him beside me. Isabella reached for Adrian's hand, lacing their fingers together. I'm not naive, Mama. I know this won't be easy, but nothing worth having ever is. Lucia was quiet for so long, Isabella thought she might refuse after all. Then, slowly, her mother reached out and took Isabella's free hand in both of hers. I can't promise I'll ever be completely comfortable with this, Lucia said. And I reserve the right to be angry at both of you when the reality gets harder than the romance, but she took a shaking breath. But I love you more than I fear this. And if you truly believe he makes you whole, then I won't stand in your way. It wasn't enthusiastic approval, it wasn't a blessing, but it was acceptance, hard-won and genuine. Isabella felt tears stream down her face as she pulled her mother into an embrace. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. Lucia held her daughter tight, and over Isabella's shoulder her eyes met Adrian's. The look she gave him was complex, not quite forgiveness, not quite trust, but maybe the beginning of both. Don't make me regret this, Lucia said to him. I won't, Adrian promised. You have my word. And in a greenhouse filled with growing things and the scent of earth and rain, 4 people who'd been damaged in different ways by the same brutal world found a fragile peace. It wouldn't last. Peace never did in their lives. But for this moment, it was enough. Julia died 3 weeks later on a Sunday morning when the garden was at its most beautiful, surrounded by the rosemary cuttings that had finally taken root. She went peacefully in her sleep, exactly as she'd wanted, with Isabella holding one hand and Lucia holding the other. The funeral was a quiet affair despite the number of people who came to pay their respects. Julia had requested no spectacle, no public mourning, just a simple service in the garden she'd spent 40 years cultivating. Isabella stood between her mother and Adrian, feeling the loss like a physical wound while simultaneously grateful that her grandmother had lived long enough to see her choose happiness. She was proud of you, Adrian said quietly as they watched the last of the mourners depart. Told me so the day before she died. Said you were braver than she'd ever been. I don't feel brave. Isabella leaned into his side, accepting the arm he wrapped around her shoulders. I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff and the ground keeps crumbling. Then we stepped back from the edge together. Adrian pressed a kiss to her temple. You're not alone in this, Isabella. You never will be again. Lucia watched them from across the garden, her expression still complicated but softer than it had been in the greenhouse 3 weeks ago. She'd kept her word about accepting their relationship, though Isabella could see the effort it cost her mother every time Adrian touched her daughter with casual affection. But Lucia was trying, and for now, that was enough. The first real test came 2 weeks after the funeral, on a cold November night when Milan's streets were slick with rain. Isabella had stayed late at the hospital where she'd begun working part-time, consulting on complex cases while she figured out what shape her medical career would take now that she'd decided to stay in Italy. She was reviewing patient files in her office when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Dr. Valenti, she answered automatically. Isabella. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, male, speaking Italian with a Sicilian accent. You don't know me, but I know you. More importantly, I know Adrian Moretti. Isabella's blood went cold. Who is this? Someone who wants to deliver a message to your lover. Tell him that Marco Santoro doesn't forget debts, and he's been carrying one for a very long time. The line went dead before Isabella could respond. She sat frozen for a moment, her medical training warring with the fear flooding her system. Then she was dialing Adrian's number with shaking hands. He answered on the first ring. Isabella, what's wrong? Someone just called me. Marco Santoro. He said, her voice broke. Adrian, he knew where I was, knew who I am to you. Where are you right now? Adrian's voice was absolutely calm, but Isabella could hear movement in the background, the sound of a car door closing. My office at the hospital, 3rd floor, east wing. Lock your door. Don't open it for anyone except me. I'll be there in 10 minutes. A pause. Isabella, listen to me carefully. You're safe. I promise you're safe, but I need you to stay exactly where you are until I get there. What does he want? To scare you. To make me react without thinking. It's a tactic, nothing more. But something in Adrian's voice suggested this was more serious than he was letting on. Lock the door, Tesoro. I'm already on my way. Isabella did as instructed, checking the lock twice before retreating to sit behind her desk. The office suddenly felt too exposed, the windows too large, the shadows in the corners too deep. She thought about the patients on this floor, the nurses making their rounds, the orderlies who might be listening to anyone with enough money to make it worth their while. She understood viscerally and for the first time what it meant to be a target. Adrian arrived in 8 minutes, not 10. Isabella heard his voice in the hallway first, speaking rapid Italian to someone, probably hospital security. Then a sharp knock on her door. "It's me, Isabella, open up." She did, and Adrian swept in with 2 other men she vaguely recognized from her mother's world. He pulled Isabella into his arms immediately, one hand cradling the back of her head, while the other splayed across her back. "You're okay," he said into her hair. "You're okay." "Who is Marco Santoro?" Isabella pulled back to look at his face. "And what debt are you carrying?" Adrian's expression was grim. "Someone from a long time ago, before I met your mother. He thinks I owe him for something that happened when we were both different people." He glanced at the 2 men who'd accompanied him. "Luca, check the building. Marco, make sure no one followed me here. Then both of you wait outside." The men disappeared without question, closing the door behind them. Adrian turned back to Isabella, his hands coming up to frame her face. "I need you to tell me exactly what he said. Every word." Isabella repeated the brief conversation, watching Adrian's expression darken with each sentence. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, clearly running calculations she couldn't follow. "This is my fault," he said finally. "I knew taking on Marco's territory last year would have consequences. I just didn't think he'd be stupid enough to come after you." "What territory? What consequences?" Isabella felt like she was missing crucial pieces of a puzzle. "Adrian, what exactly do you do for my mother?" "I maintain the balance of power in Milan. Make sure our family's interests are protected. Sometimes that means negotiating. Sometimes it means taking what belongs to people who can't hold it." His dark eyes were steady on hers. "I took 4 blocks of prime real estate from Marco Santoro because he was using them to move heroin through schools. Your mother doesn't tolerate drugs near children, so I shut him down. And now he wants revenge. Now he wants leverage. He thinks threatening you will make me give back what I took." Adrian's jaw tightened. "He's wrong. What are you going to do?" "End this, tonight." Adrian pulled out his phone, already dialing. "I'm going to make it very clear that touching you means dying badly. That even thinking about you in the wrong way means I burn everything he's built to the ground." Isabella watched him make 3 calls in rapid succession, each one colder and more clinical than the last. This was the Adrian Moretti the city feared, precise, ruthless, absolutely certain of his power. It should have terrified her. Instead, she found herself fascinated by the transformation, by the way he shifted from tender lover to lethal enforcer without seeming to change at all. When he finished the last call, he turned back to her with an expression that was part apology, part resignation. "I need to handle this personally, which means leaving you here under guard until I'm done." He must have seen the protest forming on her face because he continued quickly. "You can argue, you can be angry at me for treating you like you need protection, but I'm not negotiating on this, not when Marco Santoro has already demonstrated he knows where to find you. I'm going with you." "Absolutely not." "Adrian, I'm not a China doll. If this concerns me, if this concerns you, then you stay as far away from it as possible." His voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "What I'm about to do isn't something you need to witness. Trust me on that." "Then tell me what you're going to do." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, clearly debating how honest to be. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "I'm going to meet with Marco. Explain to him in terms he understands that you're off limits. And if he doesn't accept that explanation, I'm going to make sure he can't threaten you again. You're going to kill him, if necessary. No hesitation, no apology. I've killed for less, Isabella. I'll certainly kill to keep you safe." The casual certainty of it should have horrified her. Isabella had spent 4 years in medical school learning to save lives, had taken an oath to do no harm, had built her identity around healing rather than destroying. Everything she was supposed to be should have recoiled from a man who could discuss murder like most people discuss dinner plans. But looking at Adrian, at the way he stood between her and the door like a human shield, at the fear beneath the control in his dark eyes, at the tension in his shoulders that spoke of a man preparing for violence, she found she couldn't summon horror, only understanding. "I don't want you to kill anyone," she said carefully, "but I understand why you would. And I won't judge you for doing what you think is necessary to keep me safe." Adrian's expression shifted into something that looked like relief and pain in equal measure. "This is what your grandmother warned you about. The first time you see me, make a choice that should horrify you. The moment where you realize what being with me really means." "I realize it. I'm choosing it anyway." Isabella moved to him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. "But I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll look for another way first. That killing Marco Santoro will be the last option, not the first one." She held his gaze. "I know you're capable of mercy, Adrian. I've seen it. I need you to try to find it tonight." For a long moment, Adrian just looked at her, something complicated moving through his expression. Then he pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her like he could keep the world at bay through sheer force of will. "I promise I'll try," he said into her hair. "But if he forces my hand, then you do what you have to do, and I'll be here when you're done." Isabella pulled back to look at him. "Just come back to me, Adrian. Whatever happens, come back. Always." He kissed her then, soft and fierce and tasting like goodbye. "Luca will stay with you. He's good at his job. You'll be safe." Then he was gone, taking the two men with him and leaving Isabella alone in her office with the kind of fear that had nothing to do with her own safety and everything to do with the man she was learning to love, making choices that would stain his soul darker than it already was. The next 4 hours were the longest of Isabella's life. Luca stationed himself outside her office door, silent and professional, while Isabella tried and failed to focus on patient files. She thought about calling her mother, but what would she say? That Adrian was out handling a threat Isabella had brought into his life by existing? That she'd sent the man she loved into danger because she'd asked him to choose mercy over expedience? Finally, just past midnight, her phone rang. Adrian's name appeared on the screen, and Isabella answered before the first ring finished. "Are you okay?" The words tumbled out before he could speak. "I'm fine." Adrian's voice was rough with exhaustion. "Marco Santoro won't be bothering you again." "Is he dead?" "No." A pause. "But he wishes he was. I gave him a choice. Leave Milan permanently or lose everything he's built piece by piece until he has nothing left. He chose exile." Isabella felt something tight in her chest loosen. "You kept your promise." "I kept my promise." Something that sounded like a bitter laugh came through the line. "Though I'm not sure mercy is the right word for what I did to make him choose leaving. Do I want to know?" "No, but I'll tell you if you ask." His voice softened. "I'm coming to get you. 5 minutes." He arrived in 3, looking harder than she'd ever seen him, his knuckles bruised and his clothes disheveled. But when his eyes found hers, they gentled immediately, some of the darkness receding. "Thank you," Isabella said as they walked to his car, Luca trailing behind at a discreet distance. "For trying, for finding another way." "Thank you for asking me to." Adrian held the car door open for her. "No one else would have. Your mother would have expected me to eliminate the threat permanently. Most people in my world would have called mercy weakness." "It's not weakness. It's choice." Isabella waited until he was behind the wheel to continue. "You could have killed him. You had every reason to. But you chose differently because I asked you to. That matters, Adrian." "Does it?" "Because Marco Santoro is alive and angry, and if he changes his mind about exile, he'll come back with reinforcements and better planning." Adrian's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Mercy in my world often means leaving enemies alive to strike again. Then we'll deal with that if it happens. Together." Isabella reached over to cover his bruised hand with hers. "You can't kill every threat before it materializes. At some point, you have to trust that choosing right matters more than choosing safe." Adrian turned his hand over to lace their fingers together. "You make me believe that's possible, even when every instinct I have says otherwise." They drove through rain-slicked streets toward the villa, the city quiet in the small hours when even predators slept. When they arrived, Lucia was waiting in the library, still dressed despite the late hour, her expression tight with worry. "I heard what happened," she said without preamble. "Marco Santoro made contact with Isabella. It's handled." Adrian's voice was flat, professional. "He's leaving Milan permanently. He won't be a problem again." "You're certain?" "I'm certain he values his life more than his pride, and I made it very clear what the cost of returning would be." Adrian glanced at Isabella. "He won't touch her, Lucia. I give you my word." Lucia studied them both for a long moment, her dark eyes moving between her daughter's exhausted face and Adrian's bruised hands. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "This is what I was afraid of. Isabella becoming a target because of who she's involved with. People using her to get to you, to get to me, to shift the balance of power in this city." "I know," Adrian said simply, "and I'm sorry, but I won't apologize for protecting her." "I don't want your apology. I want your assurance that this won't happen again." "I can't give you that assurance. Not honestly." Adrian's expression was bleak. "As long as Isabella and I are together, there will be people who see her as leverage, as a way to hurt me or control me or send a message. The best I can do is make sure anyone who tries pays a price so high that others think twice. That's not enough. It's all I have." Adrian's voice was rough with frustration. "I can't make the world safe for her, Lucia. I can only make myself terrifying enough that most people won't try." Isabella had been silent through this exchange, but she couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Stop talking about me like I'm not here, like I'm some delicate thing that needs to be wrapped in cotton and hidden away." Both Adrian and her mother turned to look at her, identical expressions of protective frustration on their faces. "Tonight scared me," Isabella continued, "but not because Marco Santoro called, because I realized how much danger Adrian walks into on my behalf. How many threats he faces that I don't even know about because he handles them before they reach me." She looked at her mother. "You've been doing the same thing my entire life, haven't you? Managing threats I never saw, making sure I could live in ignorance of how dangerous this world really is." Lucia's expression shifted into something that looked almost like guilt. "I wanted you to have a normal life." "There's no such thing as normal in this family. I understand that now." Isabella straightened her shoulders. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm staying in Milan. I'm building a life here, my medical practice, my relationship with Adrian, my role in this family. And yes, that means accepting some level of danger. But I'm done being protected from reality." "Isabella, I'm not finished, Mama." Isabella's voice was firm. "I appreciate everything you and Adrian do to keep me safe, but I need you both to trust that I'm strong enough to handle the consequences of my own choices, that I can live in this world without shattering." The silence that followed was profound. Lucia and Adrian exchanged a look that spoke of shared history and mutual understanding. Then, slowly, Lucia nodded. "You're right," she said quietly. "I've been treating you like you're still a child who needs sheltering, but you proved tonight that you're stronger than I gave you credit for." She turned to Adrian. "Both of you did. Choosing mercy when violence would have been easier. That took courage." "Or stupidity," Adrian muttered. "Same thing, sometimes." Lucia's smile was slight but genuine. "My mother would have been proud of you both." The mention of Julia hit Isabella like a wave. She'd been so focused on the immediate crisis that she'd pushed aside the grief still raw and bleeding beneath the surface. Now it rushed back in, stealing her breath. Adrian seemed to sense it. His arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. "It's late. You should rest." "Will you stay?" Isabella looked up at him. "Tonight, I mean. I don't want to be alone." Adrian glanced at Lucia, clearly expecting resistance, but Isabella's mother just nodded, a gesture of acceptance that cost her something, but came freely anyway. "The guest room is made up," Lucia said. "I'll see you both in the morning." She left them alone in the library, and for a long moment neither Adrian nor Isabella spoke. They just held each other, processing the night's events in the quiet intimacy of shared survival. "This is going to keep happening," Adrian said finally. "People testing boundaries, trying to find weakness, using you to get to me. I know. And you're still choosing this? Choosing me?" Isabella pulled back to meet his eyes. "I'm choosing us. Whatever that means. Whatever it costs." Adrian's expression was complex, love and fear and wonder and resignation all mixed together. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. Isabella stood on her toes to kiss him. Come on, let's go to bed. Tomorrow we can figure out what happens next. They climbed the stairs together, exhaustion and relief making them slow. In the guest room, they undressed in silence and fell into bed, curling around each other like they could keep the world at bay through proximity alone. I love you, Adrian said into the darkness, the words quiet but certain. I know it's too soon and too complicated and probably too dangerous, but I love you, Isabella, and I need you to know that before anything else happens. Isabella's breath caught. She'd known it was coming, had felt the weight of the words building between them for weeks, but hearing them spoken aloud made it real in a way nothing else had. I love you too, she whispered back, even though you're impossible and dangerous and far too good at making me want things I shouldn't. His arms tightened around her. We're going to make this work. Somehow. I know. And despite everything, the threats, the danger, the complications still waiting to be resolved, Isabella believed it. The weeks that followed Marco Santoro's exile were almost aggressively normal. Isabella settled into her consulting work at the hospital, finding satisfaction in the complex cases that challenged her medical knowledge. Adrian continued managing the family's interests with the same ruthless efficiency he'd always employed, though Isabella noticed he was more careful now about keeping business separate from their personal life. Lucia watched them with the wary acceptance of a mother learning to let go, offering advice when asked and biting her tongue when she wasn't. It was an uneasy peace, but it was peace nonetheless. Then 6 weeks after Julia's funeral, everything shattered again. Isabella was at the villa reviewing patient files when Maria found her, the housekeeper's face pale with fear. Dr. Isabella, she said in rapid Italian, there are men here. They say they have a message for your mother, but she's in meetings all day and they won't leave. Isabella stood immediately, her medical training kicking in to assess the situation clinically. How many men? 3. They're armed. Maria's hands twisted in her apron. One of them keeps asking about you, asking when you'll be home. Ice flooded Isabella's veins. Call Adrian, now. Tell him exactly what you told me. Maria fled to make the call while Isabella moved toward the front of the villa, her mind racing through options. She could lock herself in a room and wait for Adrian, could run for the garden and try to escape through the back gates, could confront them directly and hope that being Lucia Valenti's daughter carried enough weight to keep her safe. She made it to the foyer before one of the men spotted her. Dr. Valenti. He was young, maybe 30, with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. We've been waiting for you. Please, come with us. We'd like to discuss something important. I'm not going anywhere with you. Isabella kept her voice steady despite the fear churning in her gut. Whatever message you have, you can leave it with me and I'll pass it along to my mother. I'm afraid this message is better delivered in person. The man took a step toward her, and Isabella saw the gun holstered at his hip. We don't want any trouble, Dr. Valenti, but we have orders to bring you with us, preferably without violence, but we're flexible on that point. Isabella's mind raced. 3 armed men between her and the front door. Maria, somewhere in the house, calling Adrian. The kitchen exit was closer, but she'd have to pass within grabbing distance to reach it. Before she could decide on a course of action, glass shattered somewhere deeper in the villa. The 3 men's heads turned toward the sound, their hands moving to their weapons. Adrian came through the kitchen like a force of nature, moving with a speed that seemed impossible for a man his size. The first man went down before he could draw his gun, Adrian's elbow connecting with his temple in a strike that dropped him instantly. The second managed to clear his holster, but Adrian caught his wrist and twisted, the crack of breaking bone audible even from where Isabella stood. The third man, the one who'd been speaking to Isabella, finally got his gun free and aimed. Time seemed to slow as Isabella watched his finger move toward the trigger, watched Adrian turn to face the threat, watched the mathematics of violence play out in fractions of seconds. Then Isabella was moving, her body making the decision before her mind caught up. She grabbed a heavy vase from the foyer table and swung it with all her strength, connecting with the gunman's head just as he fired. The shot went wide, plaster exploding from the wall beside Adrian's head. The gunman crumpled, blood streaming from his temple where the vase had connected. Isabella stood frozen, the remains of shattered porcelain in her hands, shock making her movements slow and distant. Adrian was beside her in an instant, his hands on her face, forcing her to look at him. Isabella, Isabella, look at me. Are you hurt? She shook her head mutely, unable to form words. Adrian pulled her close, one hand cradling the back of her head while the other held her against his chest. You're okay. You're safe. It's over. His voice was steady, despite the adrenaline she could hear beneath the words. You're safe, Tesoro. More men arrived. Adrian's people, Isabella realized distantly. They secured the three intruders with efficient brutality while Adrian kept Isabella in his arms, shielding her from the worst of what was happening around them. When Lucia arrived 20 minutes later, summoned by frantic calls from both Maria and Adrian's men, she found her daughter and Adrian in the library. Isabella was wrapped in a blanket despite the room's warmth, her hands still shaking from adrenaline. Adrian sat beside her, one arm around her shoulders, speaking in low tones to men who came and went with reports. What happened? Lucia's voice was deadly calm in a way Isabella recognized as her mother's most dangerous mood. Adrian explained in clipped sentences while Isabella tried to process what she'd done. She'd hit a man hard enough to crack his skull, had potentially killed him to save Adrian. The Hippocratic oath she'd taken felt like a distant thing, irrelevant in the face of watching someone she loved almost die. Who sent them? Lucia asked when Adrian finished. We're finding out. But based on what the conscious ones are saying, this was retaliation for Marco Santoro's exile. His cousin, apparently, who thinks taking Isabella will draw Marco back to Milan and give him leverage against us. Stupid. Lucia's expression was glacial and suicidal. Where is he now? Being collected as we speak. Adrian's voice was flat, emotionless. By the time we're done talking to him, he'll tell us everything we need to know. Isabella finally found her voice. The man I hit, is he alive? Yes, concussed, but alive. Adrian squeezed her shoulder gently. You saved my life, Isabella. He would have shot me if you hadn't acted. I could have killed him. But you didn't, and even if you had, it would have been justified. Adrian turned her to face him. You defended yourself and the person you love. There's no shame in that. But Isabella couldn't shake the image of her hands holding that vase, of the sickening crack as it connected with bone, of the man falling and blood spreading across Julia's antique floor. She'd spent years learning to heal, had built her identity around saving lives. And in less than 5 seconds, she'd been willing to end one. I need some air, she said, standing on unsteady legs. I'll come with you. No. Isabella softened her tone. Please, I just need a few minutes alone. Adrian looked like he wanted to argue, but Lucia put a hand on his arm. Let her go. She needs to process this in her own time. Isabella fled to her grandmother's greenhouse, the one place that still felt like sanctuary. She sank onto the stone bench where Julia had sat just weeks ago, surrounded by growing things and the particular silence of a space dedicated to life. She wasn't sure how long she sat there before her mother found her. I thought you might be here, Lucia said, settling beside her daughter with uncharacteristic gentleness. Your grandmother always said this place was good for thinking. I almost killed someone today, Mama. Isabella's voice broke. I looked at that man, and I didn't see a person. I just saw a threat to Adrian, and I acted without thinking. You protected someone you love. That's not wrong, Isabella. Isn't it? I'm a doctor. I took an oath to do no harm. You took an oath to save lives, which is exactly what you did. You saved Adrian's. Lucia took Isabella's hand. I know this is hard. I know it challenges everything you believe about yourself, but this is the reality of our world. Sometimes violence is the only answer. Sometimes choosing life means being willing to take it. How do you live with it? The choices you've made? Lucia was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was raw with honesty. Some days I don't. Some days I look at myself and see nothing but the blood I've spilled and the compromises I've made. But then I look at you, at the life I built for you, the choices I gave you, the freedom I protected with every terrible decision, and I think maybe it was worth it. Even if it means I become like you? You're already like me, stubborn, fierce, willing to burn the world down for the people you love. Lucia smiled sadly. But you're also like your father, kind, idealistic, believing that mercy matters more than power. That combination makes you stronger than I ever was. Isabella leaned into her mother's embrace. letting herself be held like she was still a child who believed her mother could fix anything. I don't know how to be both things. The doctor who saves lives and the woman who's willing to take them. You learn to carry the contradiction, to accept that humans are capable of both terrible violence and profound kindness, often in the same breath. Lucia stroked her daughter's hair. Your grandmother understood that. It's why she never judged me for what I did to keep us safe. She knew that love doesn't negate violence, it just makes it meaningful. They sat together in the greenhouse until dusk began to paint the sky purple and gold. When they finally returned to the house, they found Adrian in the library with news. Marco Santoro's cousin is dead, he said bluntly. He resisted questioning, violently. My men defended themselves. The subtext was clear. Adrian had made sure the threat was eliminated permanently this time. Isabella waited to feel horror, disgust, anything that would confirm she was still the person she'd been that morning. Instead, she felt only relief. And Marco Santoro himself? Lucia asked, being reminded that exile means exile, that if he or any of his remaining family come within 100 miles of Milan, I'll finish what I started. Adrian's dark eyes found Isabella's. This ends now, completely. Isabella nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying. He'd shown mercy once at her request. He wouldn't make that mistake again, and she couldn't bring herself to ask him to. I need to tell you both something, she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. After today, I understand something I didn't before. I understand why you make the choices you make, Mama. Why violence is sometimes necessary. Why mercy has to be balanced against survival. Isabella, I'm not finished. Isabella straightened her shoulders. I'm not giving up medicine. That's still who I am, still what I want to do with my life. But I'm also not going to pretend anymore that I exist separate from this family, from this world. I'm Lucia Valenti's daughter. I'm Adrian Moretti's lover. And that means accepting the darkness along with the light. Lucia's expression cycled through surprise, pride, and something that looked almost like grief. You don't have to do this. Don't have to compromise who you are. I'm not compromising. I'm integrating. Isabella looked between her mother and Adrian. I want to be involved, not in the violence, but in the decisions. I want to understand how this family works, what we protect, why we do what we do. I'm done being sheltered. That's not something you can unsee once you know it, Adrian warned. Once you understand how deep the darkness goes, you can't go back to ignorance. I don't want ignorance. I want truth. Isabella moved to stand before him. And I want to build something with you that's honest about what we both are. Not you protecting me from reality, but us facing it together. Adrian studied her face for a long moment, searching for doubt or fear. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Then we build it together. All of it, the medical practice, the family business, the life we want. No more walls between your world and mine. No more walls, Isabella agreed. Lucia watched them with an expression that suggested she was seeing her daughter clearly for the first time. Your grandmother would have loved this. Watching you become exactly what this family needs. Someone who can bridge the divide between healing and surviving. She knew, Isabella said softly. That's why she pushed us together. She saw what we could be if we stopped fighting it. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in integration. Isabella divided her time between the hospital and learning the intricacies of her family's business interests. Lucia proved to be a patient teacher, walking her daughter through the legitimate enterprises and the gray areas without flinching from uncomfortable truths. Adrian supplemented the education with practical lessons in reading people, assessing threats, understanding the unspoken rules that govern their world. Isabella discovered she had a talent for negotiation, for finding solutions that satisfied competing interests without resorting to violence. She became her mother's secret weapon in delicate situations, the doctor who could speak to humanitarian concerns while understanding bottom lines. 6 months after the attack on the villa, Isabella and Adrian stood in her grandmother's greenhouse making plans for the future. I've been thinking about the medical practice, Isabella said, her hands working soil around a new planting. What if we expanded it? Created a clinic specifically for people who can't afford traditional health care? That's a beautiful idea. Adrian watched her hands move, the familiar gesture reminding him painfully of Julia. But it would be expensive and politically complicated. I know, which is why I want to fund it through the family. Use some of the money we make from less savory enterprises to do something unquestionably good. Isabella looked up at him. Your legitimate businesses are growing. What if we accelerated that transition, moved more resources into legal ventures, and used the profits for things that matter? Your mother's been talking to you about succession planning. She has, and she thinks it's time to start shifting how the family operates. Use the power we have to build something that lasts beyond violence and fear. Isabella stood, brushing soil from her hands. I want to be part of that, Adrian. Want to help transform what we are into what we could be. Adrian pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her in the greenhouse's humid warmth. You're going to change everything, aren't you? We're going to change everything, together. Isabella pulled back to look at him. That is, if you're willing to take a chance on building something different. With you? I'd take any chance. Adrian's expression was soft in a way few people ever got to see. Though I should warn you, going legitimate doesn't mean going safe. We'll still have enemies, still face threats. I know, but we'll face them as partners, as equals. Isabella smiled. Besides, I'm pretty good in a crisis now. You've trained me well. You were always good in a crisis. I just helped you see it. Adrian pressed a kiss to her forehead. There's something else I want to talk to you about, something I've been considering for a while. That sounds ominous. It's not. Or maybe it is, depending on your answer. Adrian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Isabella Valenti, I know we've only been together for 8 months. I know we've faced more violence and chaos than most couples face in a lifetime. I know your mother is still getting used to the idea of us, and the city probably thinks I'm robbing the cradle. Adrian, let me finish. His hands were steady, but his eyes held vulnerability. I also know that I love you more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. That you make me want to be better than I am. That watching you integrate the pieces of yourself, the healer and the fighter, the dutiful daughter and the independent woman, has been the greatest privilege of my life. He opened the box to reveal a ring, elegant, understated, exactly what Isabella would have chosen for herself. Marry me, Adrian said simply. Build this new world with me. Transform this family into something your grandmother would be proud of. Choose me, every day, for the rest of our lives. Isabella felt tears stream down her face as she looked at this impossible man offering her an impossible future. She thought about all the reasons she should say no. The age difference, the violence inherent in his world, the enemies still waiting in shadows, the judgment they'd face from people who didn't understand. And then she thought about the balcony where they'd first connected, about a cottage in the hills where she'd chosen desire over duty, about her grandmother's blessing and her mother's hard-won acceptance. She thought about learning to carry contradictions, about becoming someone who could save lives and take them, about finding a partner who saw all of her and loved her anyway. Yes, she said through her tears. Yes to all of it. Adrian's smile was incandescent as he slid the ring onto her finger. Then he was kissing her, deep and thorough, and full of promises about futures they'd build together. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Isabella heard clapping from the greenhouse entrance. She turned to find her mother standing there, her expression complex but softening into something that looked almost like happiness. I suppose I should have seen this coming, Lucia said, moving into the greenhouse. You've been planning this for a while, haven't you, Adrian? Since the day she told me to choose mercy over violence. I knew then I wanted to spend my life with someone who made me better than I was. Adrian kept his arm around Isabella. I hope we have your blessing, Lucia, but we'll marry regardless. Of course you will. You're both too stubborn to let something like parental disapproval stop you. Lucia's smile was wry, but genuine. You have my blessing, though I reserve the right to be difficult about wedding plans. I wouldn't expect anything less, Isabella said, pulling her mother into an embrace. Thank you, Mama, for accepting this, for trying. You're my daughter. I'll always try. Lucia pulled back, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Your grandmother would be so proud of both of you. The wedding took place 6 months later in Julia's garden, surrounded by rosemary and roses and the particular beauty of a space dedicated to growing things. It was small, just family, and the handful of friends who understood what this union really meant. Lucia stood beside her daughter, her expression proud despite the tears streaming down her face. Adrian's few remaining friends from his military days stood with him, silent witnesses to a transformation none of them had thought possible. Isabella wore her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to fit but still carrying the scent of the lavender Julia had always kept in her closets. Adrian wore a suit that made him look distinguished rather than dangerous, though Isabella knew the gun holstered at the small of his back would never quite go away. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, there was a moment of held breath, an acknowledgement that this marriage defied conventions and would face opposition from people who didn't understand. But no one spoke. And when Adrian kissed his bride, the small gathering erupted in applause that felt like approval and benediction in equal measure. The years that followed were not easy. Isabella and Adrian faced opposition from traditionalists who thought the age gap was scandalous, from rivals who saw their union as a shift in power dynamics, from people who couldn't reconcile the doctor who ran a free clinic with the woman who'd married Milan's most feared enforcer. But they also transformed the Valenti family's operations, slowly shifting resources from violence-based enterprises toward legitimate businesses and humanitarian work. The clinic Isabella founded expanded into a network of facilities serving Milan's most vulnerable populations. Adrian's transition from enforcer to businessman proved surprisingly smooth, his strategic mind and ruthless efficiency serving him just as well in boardrooms as on dangerous streets. 3 years after their wedding, Isabella gave birth to a daughter in the same hospital where she consulted on complex cases. They named her Julia, after the woman who'd seen what they could be and pushed them together anyway. Adrian held his newborn daughter with a tenderness that made Isabella's heart ache. This man who'd spent 50 years believing he was too damaged for family learning in real time that love could redeem anything. "She's perfect," he whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Thank you. Thank you for giving me this." "We gave it to each other," Isabella corrected, watching her fierce, impossible husband become someone's father. "This is what we built, Adrian, the life we chose despite everything saying we shouldn't." Lucia, holding her granddaughter for the first time, looked between her daughter and Adrian with an expression of wonder. "My mother was right. Love isn't about safety or logic or choosing the path that makes sense. It's about recognition, about finding someone whose damage fits yours in all the right ways." 5 years after their wedding, Isabella and Adrian sat in Julia's garden with their daughter, now a precocious toddler who'd inherited her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn determination. They'd just finished planting new rosemary cuttings, continuing a tradition that stretched back generations. "Do you ever regret it?" Isabella asked, watching their daughter toddle between the rose bushes. "Choosing this life with me? All the complications that came with it?" Adrian pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Not for a single second. Every choice I made led me here. To you, to her, to a life I never thought I deserved but somehow got anyway." "We deserve it," Isabella said firmly. "We worked for it, fought for it, built it from nothing but stubbornness and hope." "Hope," Adrian repeated, the word sounding almost reverent in his mouth. "You taught me that. Taught me that 50 wasn't too old to start over, that a life built on violence could transform into something beautiful, that love was worth any risk." Their daughter ran over, demanding to be picked up. Adrian lifted her easily, settling her against his chest while she chattered about the flowers and the birds, and all the small wonders of a garden that had witnessed so much history. Isabella watched them together and thought about balconies and honest conversations, about greenhouses and impossible choices, about a grandmother who'd known exactly what she was doing when she'd pushed 2 damaged people together. She thought about mercy and violence, healing and survival, about learning to carry contradictions without being destroyed by them. Most of all, she thought about how the best love stories were always the ones everyone said were impossible. The doctor and the killer, the young idealist and the aging enforcer, the woman seeking freedom and the man offering honest partnership instead of control. They'd built something extraordinary from unlikely materials, had transformed a family empire into something that served rather than exploited, had proven that choosing love over logic, hope over fear, and partnership over safety could create a future worth the risks it demanded. And in a garden dedicated to growing things, surrounded by the evidence of choices made and consequences accepted, Isabella Valenti Moretti held her family close and understood that her grandmother's greatest gift hadn't been permission to love Adrian. It had been permission to love herself enough to choose the life she wanted instead of the life everyone expected, to be both healer and fighter, daughter and wife, doctor and partner to a dangerous man. to carry all her contradictions and call them strength, to live instead of just surviving. And that, Isabella thought as Adrian pulled her and their daughter into an embrace that felt like coming home, was worth every difficult moment it had taken to get here.